This evening, we're going to try something new. You made it through a pandemic that nearly killed half of Europe's population. Okay, so you probably won't make it through this either. However, imagine this. It's the mid to late 1300s, and the Black Daguerre has finally faded into oblivion, leaving behind a continent that seems empty. Rural areas devoid of people, run-down homes and church bells ringing in the distance. However, the more pressing concern is what follows the global catastrophe. Make sure you love what I do here before you settle in by giving the video a like and subscribing. There's no need for me to pursue you with a mace because of that. Additionally, please indicate your city and the time you are seeing this in the comment section. Discovering who else is up during these peaceful hours is a delight for me. So, let's settle in for tonight's adventure together by lowering the lights and maybe turning on a fan to create that gentle background hum. A once homely village now feels like a foreign place when you wake up. No one is about. The baker's son is no longer among you, and the blacksmith who once yelled from his forge is now completely silent. No one is more humbled than the church. It's as if God has disappeared, like you step outside you can still feel the strange stillness, like if the ground were holding its breath. Now that nature is reclaiming the rooftops at a rate no one anticipated, crows rule the roost. Although you are not truly alone, that is how it seems. Instead of communicating, survivors across vast, desolate fields maintain a 1,000-yard gaze. A sense of shared incredulity permeates the atmosphere, as if something is being spoken beneath the surface of every action. While some individuals become caught up in bizarre rituals, others go about mending fences and restoring gardens as if nothing had happened. Even though they keep missing beats, the rhythms of life keep trying to restart. The ground is changing under your feet, and you might not even be aware of it. There is no longer any reason to battle for resources because there is an unnatural abundance of everything. Tools, land, clothing, and even houses, thanks to the vanishing population. Since, nobody is still standing up to defend them against you. As you meander through what were once bustling marketplaces, you'll see empty booths and unlocked storefronts. If you've ever been to a haunted museum, this is like being trapped in your own life behind glass. A little stone home beckons you to pause. When you open the door, it makes a noise. On the table, you can see a jug of dried milk and a chair that has fallen over. Everything is covered in dust. Just emptiness, no living things. Once more, you softly shut the door. Although it is not your home, it might be if you desired it. Ownership has become more porous in this modern era. There are 9/10 of a law pertaining to possession, and the 10th is hoping that no one else desires it. Rare things have been born from this peculiar void in the past. Freedom of movement. The medieval European social order starts to crumble for the first time in ages. Even though you are a serf now, you would automatically become a free man if the lord of the manor and his heirs were to die. Less chaining, no procession. Though it falls short of complete liberation, it is progress. A manor mansion with completely darkened windows is in your path. The members of the family either departed or disappeared into a distant monastery. The property has been probed by a handful of daring locals. There is currently a goat residing in the front garden. As a little child pursues a chicken through what was once you get the impression that the old regulations perished in the epidemic, but new ones have not yet taken their place. Something serene permeates the entire scene. The mayhem has subsided, the decaying smell has diminished, and there is now a sick emptiness to contemplate and experience. The dull hum of the medieval world, the daily fight to eat, obey, and survive, has faded. It's as if civilization was put on hold and then never released. There is a tremendous weight to the quiet. Nothing, of course, is becoming more introspective and contemplative. False rumors circulate in certain cities. The conclusion was a form of divine retribution. The arrival of yet another disease is imminent. Earthquakes, blood rains, and comets will usher in the second round. Some people start acting strangely, including those who are psychologically unstable, extremely religious, or just plain bizarre. Mystics who wander the streets give sermons while processions chant hymns and whip themselves to death. However, I will save that story for another time. Attempting to endure the fallout is your current priority. Why not give growing turnips a shot? You trade some salted fish for a blanket, not with the intention of re-establishing civilization, but simply to have a conversation. You seek out other survivors, in order to feel the pain together. At times, it could seem as though you're slipping into another person's dream, a partially forgotten recollection of a bygone era. Listen, I didn't ask you to hear this. Bells continued to ring in several communities long after the Black Death's deadliest waves had passed. Not to grieve the departed, but to ward off the bad spirits that some said were still floating around. The concept of miasma, or foul air, was pervasive. Even while its exact origin remained a mystery, the fact that it must not return was crystal clear. A spiritual febreze of a desperate kind, complete with bells, incense, and bonfires. Now, for something completely out there, some people celebrate their survival by having full-on death feasts. We eat a lot of food, listen to music, and occasionally even hire people to dance with skull masks. It would be like Mardi Gras in the Middle Ages, only much scarier. Envision yourself attempting to savor a roast goose, while a figure dressed as a bone imitates your grandmother's demise. Therapy in the style of the 14th century. Discussions, though? Yes, there are plenty. To this day, academics disagree on how drastically this era altered Europe. The lords reacted by increasing their control over their subjects in any ways they could. Some argue that this ended feudalism, while others see this as wishful thinking. One thing is certain. You are currently experiencing one of the rarest opportunities in history to start over. Here are some possibilities, but no promises. Spending the night in a cabin that was once someone else's is your plan. A gentle shifting of shadows across the wall accompanies the crackling of the fire. There may never be a time when the world is perfect. But now, more than ever, it seems as though it's holding on to something, perhaps even you, to come along. Slowly but surely, morning approaches, as if not even the sun itself were sure it should rise. The scent of musty wood smoke clings to your clothing as you lie down on a straw-filled mattress. The air seems thick with silence, as if it were waiting for someone to tell it what to do next, and dew clings to the grass outside. The fields stretch out before you as soon as you step outside, verdant and mostly undeveloped, likewise devoid of substance, very, very bare. The Black Death was a labor killer as much as a killer of lives, and it's palpable. There aren't any plow lines in the dirt, no commotion from a crowded field, no whir of cartwheels. There is just stillness, broken only by the gentle uprising of the weeds. Look around. You'll see acres upon acres of untamed nature. A village's grain fields lie deserted, their stalks turning yellow from lack of usage. Now consider this, death created room, much of it. Also, nobody was left in control. On the other hand, I see that you're still here, in this altered, fragmented world that holds significance. All around you is land, agriculturally rich, undeveloped land, entire plots, and in some cases even entire villages, abandoned by families who perished in the dreadful, brutal weeks of fever. Any direction you travel, you'll see a house with its door ajar. No one has returned to collect the dishes that were left on the table. Very bleak indeed, though it's also a chance for growth. Prices begin to behave in an unusual way. Everything that land was once a pipe dream, a desire of nobility and peasants alike, is now up for grabs, assuming buying is even a thing anymore. Squatting with style is more like it. Just plant some veggies, maybe even a wandering goat, and wait for someone to intervene. To give you a hint, they won't. Lords in some countries pretend everything is normal. Lawmakers slap together formalities to remind you that you are technically still obligated to pay them for your work. They also issue decrees and yell out directives. Those papers are meaningless without the authority to carry them out, or even a small enough population to follow the peasants' instructions. Several of the lords really use it as a fire starter, and it has been ripped and burned, completely literal. In an effort to restore the old customs, the owners of several manor houses unexpectedly set fire to their homes. And now for tonight's historical fact, an official effort to lock workers into their employers and freeze salaries. Occurred in England in 1349 with the Ordinance of Laborers and again in 1351 with the Statute of Laborers. "Half of you are dead, so you won't get a raise," the government practically said. To everyone's surprise, it was poorly received. There was a lack of consistency in enforcement, penalties were frequently disregarded, and workers continued to strike for higher wages regardless. The very beginning of that mouth-watering idea known as worker power. Your role is crucial in that regard. A faceless, voiceless peasant is no longer you. You are more than a mere motif in a tapestry. The time has come for you to consider your alternatives. By the river, that derelict mill. Once you've figured it out, it's yours. That vacant field bordered by trees? Here, have it. Aiming high is now important in this bizarre medieval post-apocalypse world. By grabbing hold of your calloused hands, you can begin to alter the course of events, presenting an eccentric aspect. In their euphoria over the wide-open spaces and abundant resources, some individuals began to take on far more than they could manage. Example: a fishing pond, a cow herd, 2 cottages, 5 farms. Too lofty, of course. Is it practical? No, actually. Operating a minor medieval realm is, as it turns out, a draining ordeal, particularly when aided by a half-intoxicated neighbor and a single survivor relative. Squatter disputes can also be quite heated. Claimant of abandoned property, you are not alone. An altercation occurs. Using sticks, people make fictitious lines indicating boundaries. There are instances when the literal sticks are being used. The phrase, "get off my land," becomes considerably more strident when the land you're on was formerly a monastery, and mine has the finest apple trees in the area. The clergy and lords begin to perspire slightly at the same time, for the simple reason that more than simply land is changing hands. It is strength. The once solid medieval social pyramid, with the king at the top and the peasants at the base, is beginning to sway. Definitely tilt, but not collapse. The steward's unexpected attempt at politeness at the manor residence gives it away. In lieu of delivering a sermon, the abbot cheerfully offers bread. They are frightened, because after your allies see how powerful you are, what will happen? What about democracy? It is still the 1300s, so don't get too pumped up. However, there aren't really rags-to-riches stories set in this epoch. As food prices fall and more land becomes available, the economic seesaw becomes lopsided. Sure, more land means more food, but if there aren't enough workers to collect it, much of it will go bad or be wasted. Also, being able to conquer a field is no guarantee that you have any farming acumen. The harvest has been, well, uneven, and half of the survivors have taken up agronomy as a hobby. This period is heavily debated among scholars. For some, this marked the beginning of the gradual loosening of the strict feudal regime. Some say the true shift didn't occur until much later, and that this is more of a bug than a reboot. All we're witnessing is a momentary shuffle, but you can't help but feel like the world is tipping when you gaze across the land you've seized. The quiet where a busy village once was, and the sheep walking through someone's formal garden. You take a seat on a moss-covered stone wall that formerly delineated the boundary of someone's estate. As you feel the chilly stones beneath your fingertips, you can almost hear the lonely cry of a bird that echoes through the fields. Your mind wanders to the long-gone inhabitants of this land, who may have sang harvest songs, argued over prices at the market, or whispered secrets under the light of a candle. They've left, but where are you? Despite everything that has happened, you are still here, and the earth seems to be patiently waiting for you amidst the rubble. You're standing on someone else's property, using their shovel, and someone further down the road just referred to you as master. Almost makes you laugh. You, a specialist? For what reasons? A pig that might or might not be carrying a baby, dirt, and debt? However, they were being serious. Weird things have escalated to that point. When you take stock of your surroundings, you notice that your standing, whatever it was, is beginning to fade. Even if your name isn't inscribed on a family crest, it becomes significant all of a sudden. As you speak, people are paying attention. Anyone you ask to go get water will actually do it. Motivated by a sense of duty rather than necessity, they do it. It's novel, it's powerful. Because of numbers, it's all happened. Humans are the most valuable commodity in your post-plague economy. Everyone who has ever been a cog in the medieval machine, the peasants, serfs, villains, and cotters, now has bargaining power. Because there are fewer people to work the land, the flocks, and the wool, every warm body counts. Plus, you now have some clout, warm body that you are. If you can still refer to it as a village, you stroll into one that is close by. It's more akin to a herd of suspicious goats and partially mended roofs. If you can rebuild his fences and help with the harvest, he'll give you coin. Real coin. Not paid work. Avoid corvée. For a fee, taking a job, getting paid, and then walking to the next hamlet to see if someone offers more is the usual process. You owe your master everything, and suddenly the hallowed order begins to crumble. Subtly, as if ink were seeping through paper. Fact time for the past. Evidence suggests that peasants were successfully negotiating for and getting improved working conditions, higher wages, and even mobility by the late 1300s, When you consider that getting off the estate was formerly a crime, you can see how significant it is. Whole groups of workers would refuse to work unless their demands were satisfied, in a manner similar to a medieval strike. Although it is the spiritual forerunner, it is not yet unions. The delectable irony. So much effort was put in by the elite to keep control. There was the passing of laws, the preaching of sermons, and the exchange of furious letters between bishops and kings. Nothing mattered, though, because if you were ever in a poor transaction, you could always find someone else who was desperate for your services. Let your mind wander to a time when you might politely decline your former lord's offer of employment and emerge unscathed. Unsurprisingly, there is certain to be resistance to anything this monumental. You can tell it's happening because the sermons are suddenly really serious about doing your job right, being humble, and being in your station. The regulations are starting to tighten again, and you can hear landlords complaining about petty peasants, threatening employees with penalties or jail time if they ask for too much, but nothing happens. Simply said, once you know you have leverage, there's no way to unknow it. Minor uprisings begin to crop up all over. At least not the kind where you can say no without fear of retaliation. We haven't gotten to that point yet. Instead of becoming an apprentice blacksmith, a young lad takes up weaving. After selling her husband's equipment, a widow seeks a fresh start on her cousin's estate. A group of field laborers are able to achieve better terms thanks to a partnership between two of them. These are more like subtle reboots than revolutions. I've got a strange footnote for you. Peasants start purchasing real silverware in some towns when wealth redistribution gets so strong. Having more than one piece, rather than simply one spoon. Pairs equal. The kind of ostentatious possessions that were formerly reserved for the palace. Now that you're a peasant, you should use a real spoon to eat soup. And, if you're really daring, you could even use a second spoon for dessert. Flex after a tick bite. However, not every situation is enjoyable or equitable. Underneath everything, there's tension building. Governments enact legislation in an effort to stabilize the broken social order, while the church tries to preserve its exclusive spiritual authority, and the nobility clings to their eroded privilege. Your neighbor just offered you double the pay if you help him plant barley, and to be honest, that's more convincing than the king's and the priest's claims that you're still a sinner and a subject. Someday you hear about a faraway town that saw a complete uprising. Not quite blood and swords just yet, but hundreds of workers are storming the fields in the middle of harvest to demand better wages and chant slogans in a vulgar, angry, and unholy kind of English rather than Latin or legalese. Wondering if you could pull that off as well, you cock your head. Just imagine for a second if everyone around you suddenly stopped being so damn loyal. Would anyone dare to stand in your way? An absence of deputy sheriffs? Does a bishop collect no tithes? The riskiest aspect is that there were rules in the ancient world, but more than that, there were habits, traditions passed down through generations, conformity developed through education. People are remembering how to question now that the threads are unraveling. Maybe even a sword can't compare to it. Imagine a society where a plowman is free to pick his boss, a servant is free to quit, and a serf can wonder, why? Underneath the surface of the world, tectonic plates are changing. This is the academic discussion. Was this the turning point that finally put an end to feudalism in the Middle Ages? Some argue that the accumulation of this labor force was the catalyst for the peasant uprisings, legal changes, and ultimately, the market-based economies that characterize contemporary Europe. Still others contend that the imbalance was more transitory, and that feudalism persisted in varying forms for centuries. However, it seems as though a huge door is opening as you stand here and observe a person in patched clothing bargain like a merchant. You return to your home, which has been rebuilt using pieces of your previous life and whatever was spared by the plague. 3 individuals are debating over how to divide up some acreage as you go by. Amid heated voices, hand gestures, and eventual agreement, there was no lord, steward, or armed guard. They had to cooperate, not because anyone made them. Working together is essential. It's not quite democracy, but it's close. After returning, You can settle down with a bowl of porridge that you cooked with grain that you didn't have to steal or beg for, while a tiny fire warms you. You will go to sleep tonight with the knowledge that someone may refer to you as master again, and not in a jocular way, regardless of how crooked the walls are, or how much it rains. Now when it rings, the church bell sounds hollow, as if it is aware that its authority is beginning to crumble. As you go past the chapel, you can't help but notice that its roof is drooping, and that the bright whitewash has begun to peel off in spots. No longer does the priest greet the villagers from the outside as he formerly did. Actually, you have no idea where he is. Clergy numbers have been steadily declining, both in actual and figurative terms, since the plague. At the height of the Black Death, people flocked to the church, seeking solutions. You remember that, for the sake of mercy, just in case. What exactly did they receive? Burning incense. Several clumsy parades. Perhaps a priest who, seeing the bodies piling up, fled to his country house. Some even became sick and died in the middle of the Mass if they lingered. An institution's halo is seriously damaged by such actions. Now that the dust has cleared and the atmosphere is calm, you may be asking, what if the church isn't privy to all the details? Will it ever happen? Not only are you not alone in believing this, but it might be quite hazardous if shared with the wrong people. More and more, people are speaking their minds, challenging assumptions, and casting doubt on the veracity of religious leaders' claims to have divine authority. This is a fact from history. A whole generation of priests was killed out by the plague in many places, particularly in rural areas. As for the alternatives, frequently, training was expedited. Those involved may be unqualified or even obviously corrupt. The church's standards were lowered because it needed bodies. As you sit at Mass, you can find yourself thinking, this guy is no closer to God than I am. This is especially true if you're an unsure 20-year-old who struggles to recall Latin verbs. Plus, it becomes much stranger. It can be months, if not years, before a town has its first church service. We will not have communion, weddings, or confessions. Vacant pulpits and dilapidated altars. People change. For some reason, they take it upon themselves to pray at home, burn candles in the kitchen, and even bury the dead. Religion is reduced to a do-it-yourself endeavor, a little less stuffy, but still very intimate. Moreover, a gilded altar fails to impress once one has constructed their own. Rumors and rumors about new movements emerging from the shadows are also present. Pastors who travel from town to town wearing tattered shoes and dusty cloaks instead of robes with golden threads. Their interpretations of Scripture differ. Simplicity is something they discuss. Concerning fairness. About how a church is unnecessary for God to speak. Like moths to a light, they attract some people. Some are scared to death. Lastly, we have the wildly intrepid, agents that cause flagella to form. They are audible before they are visible. An ecstatic hymn, the monotone cadence of a whip striking flesh. They ravage towns like a human hurricane, excessive or excruciating facial contortions. Neither of these is absolutely clear to you. The epidemic, they think, was retribution for their sins, so they openly and violently beat it out of themselves. It's completely unnerving. It's half acting and half hysteria. This is the little-known fact. In certain regions, the church itself forbade flagellant processions. Way too much troublesome, too unconventional, overly boisterous inside their long-standing religious institutions. Envision yourself so fervently believing in God that the church orders you to be less so. It makes sense, nevertheless, to those whose world has recently ended and begun again. No longer do the conventional norms feel holy. Broken rituals are necessary for a broken world. The church in your own community is still physically there and may be used, but nobody is very interested in going there anymore. Once upon a time, it was the focal point of your world. New life beginnings, deaths, marriages, holidays, financing matters. I feel like I'm in an echo chamber now. The occasional ringing of the bells persists, but now it seems more like a routine than an order. This is actually what's going on. Loosening oneself from framework is faith. It is still believed by many. They do, without a doubt. Contrarily, it is now less centralized. Not as strict. Beliefs go from being about dogma to being about survival when a catastrophic event wipes out everything. A widow, who has not been legally approved, is praying to saints as she walks down the lane. Some people believe that spirits can safeguard their homes by leaving bread out for them. They are being left in the dark. A new door has blown open in the spiritual realm. The church's higher echelons are understandably not happy about it either. Apostolic letters are sent. They are known as synods. Many people are worried about heresy. More and more often, that word appears in speech. There is heresy. Disregard that. This new plague is something they can control, or so they believe. However, 3 others step in whenever they put an itinerant preacher down. The academics also disagree on this one. Did the Protestant Reformation begin with the dwindling power of the church following the plague? Yes. According to some, this is when people started to put less faith in Rome and more in themselves. Some argue that the disillusionment was more gradual, like a fissure that expanded over many generations. You are, in any case, residing within the fracture, and it's subtle, but noticeable, when you skip going to church, while nobody objects while you avoid confessing, when you find yourself gazing up at the night sky and wondering if the Bible really does have all the answers. You probably wouldn't say it aloud, but you definitely think it. You and your neighbor both do. And there's the herbalist who uses her native tongue when she prays. In your cottage, you enjoy a peaceful evening as you watch the candle dance in the cold air. There are no knots in your rosary as they hang on the wall, and you still believe. Things have changed, though. More freedom, less conformity, more inquiry, less dread. Oddly reassuring, there is now complete stillness where ceremony once existed. You start to question whether this isn't more in line with genuine religion than those elaborately bejeweled garments and golden chalices. And when, later that night, the wind howls through the trees, and you quickly pray, not to saint whoever, into the darkness, coming to the realization that something essential has changed, plague or no plague. In the past, you would pray for safety on your knees in a church. Lethal force. You can now stand on your own soil, raise your eyes to the heavens, and pray for enlightenment. You can feel the hair on the back of your neck stiffening from the stronger, rawer wind today. You draw closer to your cloak and cast a quick glance down the road. You can hear their approach before you even see them. A low, rhythmic thud followed by voices chanting in a high-pitched, almost soul-shaking register. The flagellants then materialize around the bend. Instinctively, you retreat into the shadow cast by a low stone wall and observe their passage. Regardless of the slashing wind, I stand barefoot, mud-caked, and undressed to the waist. The scars on their backs like rough calligraphy. Red streaks run across them. In an odd harmony, they advance while repeatedly pounding flails down on their shoulders in a perfect agonizing beat. A living embodiment of human suffering. Maybe they've lost all sense of it, you think. Some of them appear to be sleep-deprived. They're wearing hoodies and have dark, sunken eyes. A rudimentary wooden cross is pulled through the dirt by one of them. Someone else is waving a flag that features the iconic post-apocalyptic motif, a skull and an hourglass. They recite a combination of Latin and regional vernacular, half of which was likely made up on the moment, including lines that you might not recognize. From their doorways, onlookers observe. Nobody cheers or gets on board, but then again, nobody gets on board either. The purpose of this is not amusement, but caution. A itinerant sermon of condemnation and misery, reiterating that the plague was more than a natural calamity. It was a form of punishment, somewhat heavenly palming. But instead of quietly apologizing, These people went all-out horror movie style. This is a fact from history. Immediately following the Black Death's devastating impact on Europe, particularly in Germany, the Low Countries, and portions of France, the flagellant movement reached its height. For some reason, they thought that if they publicly shamed themselves, it would appease God and make up for the world's sins. They were influential for a brief, disorganized period. People flocked to see them, towns welcomed them, and opinions on their status ranged from pious to extremist. Expectedly, the church felt conflicted. Public shaming is, on the one hand, appropriate. Meanwhile, a little too much attention began to focus on this entire, unapproved theological roadshow. It got so bad that some factions began spreading their own doctrine. Just blood singing and self-delivered punishment. No popes, bishops, or confession to priests required. As expected, the Vatican clung tenaciously to its pearls. Even when the Pope and other municipal authorities formally banned the practice, the notion persisted like a bad hymn. Clearly, you are not to associate with the flagellants. You're just inquisitive, not crazy. Something, though, is stirring as they go by, and it's the tension of a culture that has lost faith in its long-standing institutions, but has failed to establish any alternatives. Therefore, focus within instead. Or, more specifically, quite loudly and outward. Anguish transforms into a display. Theater of guilt. Pageantry like that is devastating for those who are still reeling from loss, terror, and the struggle for survival. While the flagellants continue their march, other strange feelings are beginning to take hold as well. At intersections and in abandoned barns etched into tree bark, you may find small shrines that don't seem to belong. Homemade ones, not the official ones with halos and saints. Keepsakes, relics, and candles from the afterlife. Everybody seems to be making up their own religion these days. Like a shattered chalice, the rites fractured the world and poured out onto the floor. At the fringe of history, in a handful of dispersed locations, new saints were worshipped. Those that did not been canonized by the church but instead arose out of local legends or out of pure desperation. Both St. Tidfil and St. Marla of the Candle Flame protect from plague. People still lighted candles and left offerings despite it being completely unofficial and made up. Everyone is creating their own spirituality combo plate at this do-it-yourself buffet. As you make your way back through your hamlet, you can't help but notice how peaceful everything is now, following that solemn procession. No one brought their kids to the park to see it. After quickly making the sign of the cross, the trainee baker dashed inside. Not punishment itself, but the volume at which it has grown has upset the public. This is the reality after all. Not everyone says it out loud, but most people are sick and tired of suffering. They've had enough. The idea of willingly adding more to it is like rubbing vinegar onto a cut. It is in this area that the argument is beginning to break out. Does pain have any redeeming qualities, or is it all for naught? A good martyr story, nuns going hungry, saints being burned at the stake, or righteous men sleeping on nails, was popular in the pre-plague world. After seeing half the population scream their deaths out on the streets, though, some are beginning to question whether or not seeking solace and tranquility isn't wicked. Perhaps they are also holy. According to these academics, the flagellants and comparable activities were the medieval worldview's last-ditch effort to rein in the spiritual genie. Others argue that they heralded a profound spiritual shift that would spark revolt, reformation, and the birth of a new world. Whatever the case may be, you've just witnessed it firsthand, and the memory will remain. The sound of a whip grazing flesh is one that stays with you. Sometime later that night, you catch the sound of singing. A hymn it is not. The breeze carries a gentle song that seems to have been sung to soothe a restless child. It envelops the village like a blanket. In a culture that sought to eradicate gentleness, this kind of music serves as a gentle reminder that people are not gone, but rather are continuing to live their lives. As you lean against the fireplace, you stir a pot of soup that has onions, barley, and a pinch of salt pork. You savor each bite calmly. Aside from the sound of firewood crackling and the breeze brushing against the shutter, there is no Latin chanting or flagellation. Imagine those brave soldiers, their backs bruised and their voices hoarse, as they make their way into the next village. You can't help but wonder whether they ever felt peace again, or if they gave it up, certain they weren't worthy. However, you will not be relinquishing yours. It sounds like you made it. This bizarre, fragmented, and ever-changing world may make it the most holy deed of all. You got up bright and early the following day and headed out along a dirt road that had formerly linked 3 or 4 settlements. At this point, it links 1.5. Somewhat chilly, the air has a dampness that sticks to your sleeves and eventually seeps into your bones. As you go, you'll see uncultivated fields with tall grass that has grown over the edges and hedgerows that are dense and unruly. The land is beginning to recover what humans have lost. Next thing you know, a village, or what remains of one, populates the hill to the right, framed by a row of wilting birch trees. On your ascent to a low elevation for a better vantage point, you are struck by the utter lack of sound. The air is clear, there are no dogs barking, and no one seems to be around. Someone apparently got tired of trying and abandoned a crumpled cart halfway through the voyage, as roofs collapse and doors droop. Take care as you make your way between the houses. Several appear to be partially robbed, having been emptied by nomadic scavengers or perhaps inhabitants of surrounding towns. For some, the past is as dusty and unappreciated as a museum that no one ever visits. The rafters of a solitary cottage still bear the weight of dried herbs. At the foot of a cradle is a wooden cup with a central cutout. Looking inside a tiny, doorless church, you can see that one upright pew is lit up by sunshine streaming in from the ceiling. The remainder is in ruins. Long ago, God departed from this place. This happens often. It's simply that this is your first close-up view of it. As a result of the Black Death, whole communities disappeared. In terms of both casualties and actual presence, a lot of people either ran away, died, or never came back. The population of certain towns was so low that their names were simply removed off the maps. There are no documents, no heirs, no tenants, and no cattle, completely non-existent. This is a fact from history. The pandemic caused the total abandonment of more than 300 settlements in England alone. For some, the epidemic was the final straw. They had been struggling for some time previously. To this day, people refer to these places as lost villages, since their names are only vaguely etched onto long-lost legal papers or on weathered stones. And standing in one right now, you feel the weight of loss like never before. Perched on a deteriorating stone stair, you survey the once beloved village green, which is now little more than a mangled mess of rabbit holes and weeds. Thinking about all the lives that were impacted by this place is odd. Getting hitched, having children, and arguing about chickens. It makes you question whether they ever imagined how peaceful their homes would become. It would be as if all their hard work, their regimented routines, and their rhythms could suddenly fade away, and it's happening all over. Tales from fellow travelers are shared on the journey back. A whole valley devoid of any structure whatsoever. Churches whose bells haven't rung for years and are cracked. Deer now stroll across the market square as towns are swallowed up by forests. According to one individual, there was a community where no one was buried because everyone died so quickly. According to him, the remains of the victims are said to be lying in the houses, reduced to mere bones, waiting for dinner at the sun table. You don't inquire as to his knowledge, but something peculiar occurs amidst that vast expanse of nothingness. The elements enter. Collapsed roofs allow trees to grow. Ivy scuttles across altars. Barn rafters conceal bird nests. Owls can be heard in the chapel, and foxes can be seen in the streets. Yes, it's creepy, but it's also strangely lovely. The world seems to be healing itself in the stillness. You have the impression that the planet isn't in mourning as you are. Adjustment is all it takes. Unimportant detail. People have been known to go into abandoned cities and claim them as their own. Some of these tales are true, while others are likely embellished. Moving into a place as if it were their permanent home is all it takes, replacing their old identities with new ones. The idea is so convincingly post-apocalyptic and medieval that you almost hope it's genuine, even though it's hard to confirm. A peculiar dispute arises among academics when discussing the possibility of reinvention through disaster. Some think that this time period was associated with an early type of psychological distancing, wherein survivors had to physically separate themselves from the trauma in order to cope. Running away from their old lives and homes, they severed links with everything they knew. Some say that despite the crumbling buildings, residents fought to keep their village's memories alive. You can't tell which way is up as you stand before this deserted cottage. You can't help but feel a sense of tranquility when you visit these locations. At some point, you become aware of your own breathing and the sensation of your own footfall. The person's memory, rather than their possessions, seems like you're intruding. With each shattered roof tile, more and more questions arise. Have they disappeared? For what reason did they not return? Even though you're lost and confused, you press on. You will eventually come across a well that has a split in its stone rim running along the center. The pulley handle is encircled by a vine that has long since died. Put a pebble inside and see what happens. Absence of splash, merely the echo receding into a profound stillness. Like a book that has been closed and left on a high shelf, this community is not just deserted, but sealed. The sun will have begun to set behind the hills by the time you return home. Your cottage, which is weathered and uneven yet alive, has a new, cozier vibe to it now. As you sit in the doorway, you watch the shadows spread across the road as you light a fire and cook a pot of stew. The barrenness you witnessed today doesn't exactly fill you with terror, but it does heighten the value of all you've restored. You have a restless night and imagine deserted cities in your dreams. In your dream, you run barefoot through these fields, and with each stride, the grass grows taller behind you. As you walk through, doors swing open, windows glitter like eyes, and a gentle, spectral chime echoes from the crumbling bell towers, not to warn, but to greet, as if the forgotten places remember. Not in a scary, haunting tomb kind of way, though that's not uncommon, but in a more practical, what to do with all the dead type of way, and you find yourself thinking about bones first thing in the morning. For the simple reason that during the plague itself, nobody dared to mention this. Holy water, hands, and time were in short supply, and there were far too many bodies to properly attend to them all. You are now faced with a second, less dramatic issue, the aftermath of death, now that the storm has passed. You slip on your boots and step out into the soft light of dawn. Everything seems like an unfinished oil painting due to the gloomy sky, which is a dismal gray. It was mentioned that a new chapel is being constructed in the village across the way, so you're on your way there. They want to remember, not because the old one crumbled or burnt. Naming ceremony. Is that enough? Words are becoming a bit of a mystery to you. A tiny orchard that someone is attempting to revitalize is passed as the road meanders across low hills. As she calmly and methodically plucks half-ripe apples from a basket, a girl waves to you from atop a ladder. Only a short time ago she would have avoided making direct eye contact. These days, it's all about the fleeting connection. Upon reaching the location of the chapel, you pause. You wouldn't have guessed it. A meticulously arranged circle of stones. No great building, enormous stoneworks, or elaborate decorations. 2 candles in clay holders on either side of a simple, upright wooden crucifix in the middle. About a dozen individuals have gathered, some sitting and some kneeling. Some are holding hands, while others are just looking down. You find out that it's more of a remembrance circle than a church, a spot to sit in sorrow. In hushed tones, a man recalls the springtime death of his wife. The woman's mother and 2 sons are brought up. Pointing to the sky, a young child, less than 6 years old, says nothing. They are not told to be quiet, and no one is in a hurry. Neither a service nor a performance can be described as it. Something unfiltered, sincere, and eerily silent is there. Remembering like this is the wave of the future. Spaces, not mass graves or never-ending bells. Areas for grieving that include not only the departed, but also the living as they grapple with the meaning of survival. This is a fact from history. Europe saw a dramatic uptick in the building of memorial, foundations and chantry chapels following the Black Death, too. Have prayers recited for their souls in perpetuity after death would be a luxury for the wealthy surviving. Whole structures were devoted to this concept. Perpetual intercession to preserve remembrance, together with modest deeds. The practice of naming a kid after a person who has passed away. Every day of the feast, light a candle. Constructing a stone ring in a vacant field. For a while, you lift stones. Nobody expresses gratitude or even wonders why you're pitching in. There will be no such gathering here. Like the plague, grief has leveled societal roles to an extreme degree. There has been a death in the family. Plenty of people have seen their entire family disappear. Grief, however, does not end in places like memorial circles and chapels. It is also evident in the artwork. At their residence, an individual has sculpted a likeness onto the door lintel. Arms raised, a dancing skeleton grins. They refer to it as a ghastly dance. Their pervasiveness becomes apparent to you. Wall coverings, carvings made from wood, church pews or prayer book margins adorned with little figures. Life with death, not as a conclusion, but alongside it. A clown, cautionary note, a joke whose punchline is the worst. As a strange but true fact, certain towns would put on full-scale plague processions every year, complete with actors dressed as skulls and angels to drive home the point of mortality. Not simply to mourn, but to cope. Laughter becomes a survival mechanism after witnessing so much death, as weird as it sounds. You begin to comprehend the rationale behind the pandemic jokes that some survivors make. One of the most inexpensive forms of rehabilitation is macabre humor. Meanwhile, acts of kindness flourish like mushrooms following a rainstorm. Houses with arms grow. Suddenly, orphanages spring up in areas that had no prior need for them. Those who are fortunate, healthy, and suddenly rich start to do good deeds like support soup kitchens, distribute grain, and even adopt stray children. Guilt, cynics would say. It might be recognition, or it could be that you are bound to something just by being is implied in this implicit recognition. You take it upon yourself to accomplish little things, bringing additional bread loaves to the neighbor who recently lost her husband, putting the elderly man's tools to better use, who has been silent since summer. Just do it. You don't need anyone's approval. Not because it's noble or anything. It's just that doing something is better than doing nothing in the aftermath of the earthquake, and helps make sense of the quiet. Next door, you'll find a scholar who keeps to himself when it comes to letter writing. Every few weeks he purports to burn the letters in a clean fire as he writes them to the deceased. At the market, you catch a glimpse of him, pale and blinking as if he hasn't spoken to anyone in days, but he manages to muster a small, just right smile as you greet him. That expression, that sight of hopelessness, is still fresh in your mind. Historians disagree on whether the post-plague actions of kindness and memorialization were genuinely selfless or merely transactional. Perhaps this will prevent God from punishing me in the future. The intellectual discussion seems like background noise while you're standing amongst folks throwing stones and babbling to the wind. Whatever motivates people to take action, fear, love, grief, what really counts is that they are taking action. On that particular night, you should light a candle within your own window, rather than at a temple or church. You take your time sitting there, observing the flicker of the flame. Your sister and the youngster who threw pebbles into the river and then never returned from his feverish adventure are on your mind. Picture the stench of disease wafting through the air, and how the town became silent the day the bell stopped ringing because no one was around to answer it. The candle's flame is dim. Sobs are not your thing. That is sufficient. Settle down. Also, you bear in mind, I guess that's plenty. Sometime in the middle of the morning, you might notice that someone is sporting red hose, vibrant crimson, cherry, verging on scandalous red, not crimson, wine-colored, or any dusty burgundy. Like a blaze in a misty meadow, it captures your attention. The peculiarity lies here. Everyone appears unfazed. Vary nothing more than a cursory glance and an eyebrow arch here and there. Gazing up, you pause. I mean, not at the individual, but at the concept. Lively, daring, and stylish. Here, in the midst of a time that ought to be reserved for mourning. You didn't anticipate that the plague would have an impact on the fashion industry. This, however, is true. It is, without a doubt. Because let me tell you something. Everything was cracked open. A plethora of unwritten regulations were revealed when it happened. A lot of people who never had any money before find themselves suddenly flush with cash. People who previously had no say in the matter now do. What do you do when you are no longer subject to arbitrary dietary restrictions, death threats, or racial segregation in clothing? Your imagination runs wild. Quite disturbed, actually. In town you may see it. The younger generation, in particular, is sporting tunics that are cut shorter. Some men are revealing more skin, also women. The sleeves had begun to flare once more. To top it all off, hats are now more showy than functional. A woman at the market is adorned with a lengthy veil that cascades down her back like a bridal train. A salt vendor is sporting a pair of shoes that are straight out of a children's book, complete with curled toes. This is not a noble cause. This is a human being. No one made it out alive. The ghostly attire seems to be over for them as well. This is a fact from history. Even among the lower classes, ostentatious apparel was seen to spike following the Black Death. As a result of rising salaries and the elimination of many affluent families, the average person found themselves with more discretionary income and less people dictating how to spend it. A brief, spectacular, and chaotic surge in fashion ensued as a result of this. The once banned materials, velvet, silk, furs, embroidered items, became visible on the bodies of those who had no business touching them. Do you recall the previous sumptuary regulations that specified the precise attire that a merchant and a nobleman were permitted to wear? Yes, they are still officially recorded, yet enforcing it is at ease, so to speak, mostly due to the fact that the enforcers are either no longer alive or are engrossed in working golden thread into their own doublets. The authorities do their best, of course. Public shaming into modesty is enforced through edicts in certain places. The wearing of fur by anyone who does not have the proper title is considered a sin in God's eyes, according to one especially bitter lord. The baker's daughter, meantime, appears the following day with sleeves adorned with fur. Did it happen by chance? Not likely. For your amusement, here's a tidbit. There was a time when men's shoes had such ridiculously long points that lawmakers attempted to regulate them. In the Krakow style, for example, the toes may reach a length of 2 feet. To ensure they remained upright, people would pack the ends with wool or moss. You can't help but fantasize about spraining an ankle due to your own style and question whether the beauty was worth the risk. But it's more than that. When you put on your best clothes, it's because you've been through a terrible tragedy, and now you just want to be noticed as an important person, and not only as someone who achieved success, an individual whose identity is not limited to their occupation, family name, or guild connection. For the first time ever, you may wear red hose, not to flaunt it, but because it's your style. Underneath it all, there's a stranger, deeper shift. Mourning as an aesthetic is evolving. People are embracing contrast rather than wallowing in sackcloth and ashes. Embroidered silver thread edges, dark silk sleeves with brilliant trim. The meaning changes. There is recognition of death, but the focus is on life. The concept of beauty shifts from rebellion to memory for you. In this place, every vibrant outfit becomes a murmured still. Well, that is the point of contention. If the current epidemic of fashion was just a passing fad, or if there was deeper meaning behind it. Some historians contend that the period of excessive spending on luxury goods was really a sugar rush preceding the next great famine. Some see it as a harbinger of a society beginning to value and celebrate uniqueness in taste, identity, and expression, while others see it as part of a larger trend toward individualism. On a low stone seat on the market's edge, you sit and take in the kaleidoscope of forms and colors. It's only Tuesday. There will be no fashion show. Another thing, though, catches your eye. More people are smiling. This is still a generation that has seen tragedy, so there may not be enormous smiles, but there is a certain ease in the shoulders and a gentleness in the eyes. Plus, it no longer sounds strange when someone laughs. Thinking about your own clothing, the worn-out tunic and cloak, makes you feel a little bit out of date. I wouldn't say impoverished, but I am peaceful in a world where music is making a comeback. Caressing the fabric, you ponder which option would you pick if you had the money. Plush emerald velvet. Perhaps those ridiculous shoes with the tiny little ears. If no one warned you against it, would you still wear a hat with feathers? As you make your way back to your house, you'll see a bunch of kids playing in the park. One of them is wearing a removable crown. Berries adorn a tangled web of reeds. As the others applaud, they declare themselves king of autumn. No grown-ups intervene. Nobody interjects to correct them. Such regulations would be impractical in a world that is still emerging. You ask the neighboring weaver for a needle and thread that night. As you sit by the fire, you stitch your cloak together, hoping to transform it rather than simply repair it. A narrow blue border is stitched along the hem. It's a start, if little. In the morning, when you wrap it across your shoulders, it will feel slightly warmer. A desire for meat was never in your plans, in a different way. I don't mean in the way that you fantasize about roasted geese while you pluck weeds from your garden. Porridge, root vegetables, and anything else your family could squeeze out of unyielding soil were your staples growing up. Rare was the meat. Indulgence for special occasions like weddings or feast. Interesting but not common. However, at this moment, 3 doors down, someone's pan is now sizzling with bacon, and it smells amazing. Instinct dictates that you follow the aroma. Following it will bring you to a quaint cottage where a young lad, who is just out of diapers, is skillfully cooking over an open fire. You know who he is. Both of his parents passed away last year. It is currently his aunt's home. Silently, he gestures for you to come over, then removes a piece of meat from the skillet and places it on a piece of brown bread. Then you sit down next to the fire, have a snack, and thank him. It's a little overdone, but that only makes the fat little crunchy on the outside. It's rich and salty. Chowing it slowly, as if it were a poem, is your technique. And what's even stranger? No longer do you find it surprising. Dishes are evolving. A new diet is emerging. When it comes to who gets to consume what, the globe is altering its hierarchy once again. You see, the typical demand for farmland decreased considerably when half the population lived there. Yes, fields went fallow, but the most critical thing was that grain prices fell down. Oats, barley, and wheat were all of a sudden plentiful, inexpensive, and even despised in some areas. People began to seek for alternative foods when grain was no longer an essential component of every meal. How about the results? Livestock, lost cattle, strays of pigs, poultry, goats, and sheep in fields. In an instant, you could feed yourself better than before. All you needed was a little initiative and a strong stomach. Now, protein wasn't considered a luxury. It existed independently. Contrary to popular belief, the poor's diets in Europe saw a marked improvement following the Black Death. Bone health actually improved in the generation after the plague, according to archaeological investigations. This is probably because people had easier access to meat and dairy. Could you believe it? Death delivers both destruction and greater nutrition. Here you can find the paradox of plague. As you assist the youngster in gathering kindling, you occupy the remainder of the morning in conversing about the shifts in the neighborhood market. According to him, individuals no longer store food in large quantities. Meat fatigue, too much pork, and not enough variety are all topics he jokes about. An aunt of his is preserving onions. Currently, they are exchanging honey for eggs. Cheese is made every 3 days by someone down the road. Things that were once unusual are now commonplace, and people are adjusting at a rate no one anticipated. However, not all are rejoicing. The clergy, the ancient order, the lords, and the estate managers. The peasants are eating too much, and it's becoming apparent to them. It is even considered sinful by some. As he preaches a sermon on gluttony, one local abbot gives the assembly the silent treatment. His pat on his own round belly gives you the willies. Nobody is very eager to return to the days of dry bread and cabbage water. Minor detail? Oh, absolutely. A group of harvest workers in northern Italy once turned down their employer's offer of low pay and subpar food. Meat was a must for them, or else they would go on strike. And they walked. Peasants banding together over stew must have been a sight to behold. It goes without saying that not all changes are pleasant. The fundamental framework of farming starts to change as cattle numbers increase and grain prices decrease. The practice of shifting cropland to pasture begins. One commodity that is quickly replacing gold is sheep. Wool is a lucrative crop that requires little in the way of oversight and is easy to handle. The first hint of this appears when a neighbor requests permission to let his sheep graze on the vacant site where a house formerly stood. Yes, I understand. Are there any other possible uses for it? Now comes the difficult part. Success comes to those who can adjust, those that refuse to disappear. You can see it in the eyes of some traditionalists who refuse to budge from their long-held beliefs. Such is the idea that a prayer should precede each meal and that a loaf should be served first. Although the majority of individuals are realistic, as the week winds down, they begin salting meat, increasing their ale production, and preparing wild stews from the leftovers. However, the heat, fat, and fullness provide comfort despite the harsh flavors. The practice of eating together as a family is also on the rise. More relaxed get-togethers than the strict ecclesiastical feast days. You may have heard of survivors' suppers, wherein neighbors come together to share food and drink. Gathering around a fire, people enjoy a meal and a drink while sharing what they have. Root veggies, dried herbs, and booked meat in the evenings. Living life to the fullest without lamenting or apologizing. Eventually, you'll be the host. It lacks elegance. With a little cheese, some pickled greens, roast carrots, and barley stew. My buddy brings me some mushrooms. Then there's the one who sends what she claims to be apple pudding. Actually just mashed apples, honey, and lots of optimism. The food is going fast. Less time passes between giggles. Music is also included. Playing the lute is a young lad. This girl can still make her voice crackle when she sings high notes. Feel free to tell everyone. Nobody is complaining. For a fleeting second, you become acutely aware of the fact that your face hurts from smiling too much. That sensation that has eluded you for a long time. Feelings of joy as well as fullness of stomach met. That night, you go to sleep feeling full. Not only of food, but of something harder to define. Some fuzzy, spherical, human-like entity. The flames extinguish gradually. As if they were the final chords of a song, the embers pulse before your eyes. Famine and loss of life do not appear in your dreams. You imagine a scene with clinking glasses, the sound of laughter resonating from nearby stone cottages, and the aroma of a delectable dish simmering in a weathered iron pot. You feel a peculiar clarity upon awakening. Indeed, the disease did claim lives. However, it caused a complete upheaval. Famine is one of them. Among them is happiness. What a meal represents is part of that concept. Perhaps there is the place where recovery starts. As you savor a comforting snack with someone who is still with us, something unusual has been heard in town, and it's not the typical blacksmith's clang or the quiet rumbling of carts trudging over weathered cobblestones. The sound you hear is the distinctive, slightly comical snap-crack of a long-beaked mask when it suddenly pivots to face you. You halt your progress. Also, the figure with the beak on their head stops for a split second, so the two of you can meet eyes, or at the very least, try to read the eyes. In the shadow of the window, look at this doctor. He's a plague doctor, or to be more precise, someone was still sporting that attire. No official business has brought him here. It is evident of that. No new holes are being excavated. No frightened peasants are tossing herbs into their fireplaces, and there has been no epidemic. He is merely strolling about, with his long coat billowing behind him, a staff in his hand and a mask on his face. He seems to have missed the memo that the epidemic stopped years ago. Whispering, a little girl asks, "Why is he still dressed like that?" As she peers out from behind a barrel, their mother then firmly pulls them back, as though the very nature of the inquiry might call forth an ominous presence. The truth is that at this point in time, the plague doctors have no clear plan of action. They invaded homes nobody dared to step foot in when they were heroes, or at least a necessary evil. Then they looked at the boils. Gagging was their best effort. They put on those avian masks filled with spices and herbs in the vain hope that it would ward off the vile miasma. They represented people's best hope for a period of time. However, at this moment, after harvest, they stand there like scarecrows, still there, but misplaced. This is a fact from history. More commonly associated with the 17th century is the classic plague doctor mask, which features a long, curved beak filled with fragrant materials. Most doctors in the 14th century didn't use full-face masks like that when the plague first broke out. The picture, however, grew to represent the Black Death in its own right as time passed. Accuracy was of utmost importance. I will never forget it. Also horrifying, which could have been the intended effect. As he silently passes you by, the man with the mask remains silent. Like a ripple in a calm pond, the street becomes slightly quieter as he passes by. Whispers reach your ears. A fury has consumed him. Everyone in his family perished. He believes it will return if he removes it. As they are told, the stories gain depth. One rendition even goes so far as to say he isn't a genuine man, nothing but death and maintaining appearances. You observe him reach a turning point and then vanish, leaving you to question, what becomes of the individuals who were indispensable solely at times of crisis? Those people whose careers revolved around emergency situations and tragedy? The plague doctors weren't the only ones who dug graves, made coffins, and pulled coffins. Their significance diminishes as time goes on. Plus, what would they be without that goal, if it were the sole glue that held them together? Turn around a few of them. Creative headstones adorned with birds, flowers, and hopeful miniature sunrises have begun to be carved by a grave digger you know. Ale is now delivered by a plague cart driver. Now that he's into woodcutting, the man who used to fasten quarantine signs flinches like he's about to scream every time he hammers. But some people don't change. They linger like specters in their hometowns, haunting reminders of the darkest times. When survivors see them, it brings back too many memories. They try to stay away from them because of this. Change the subject. Cross streets. Act as if you don't notice. It's not cruelty. It's just exhaustion. A little known fact here. Unofficial cleansing celebrations, complete with bonfires to burn masks, robes, and plague charms, were conducted in several communities when the last waves of plague faded, for the sake of both the ritual of closure and the destruction of potentially harmful objects. It was also outright forbidden in some areas to wear plague armor or garb. Reminders were not wanted. Unspoken yet powerful, superstition is on the rise. If you don't want to bring death back, don't dress like it. But some just can't release. A small group of people who call themselves doctors are holding on to their past and claiming patients still need them. They offer to rid houses of evil spirits, experiment in questionable treatments, and try to sell amulets to fight off residual pestilence. They may be aware that their time has come to an end, but bidding farewell to a role is more difficult than surviving the disease. Academics disagree on whether the disappearance of iconic individuals like the plague doctor after the epidemic signifies a transition to modern treatment or perhaps the end of a specific type of despair. Just like today's doctors, tomorrow's will be robed in pristine whiteness and supported by evidence rather than wishful thinking and rosemary. That night, you and a few pals gather around the community fire pit. A mention of the man with the mask is made. Morale plummets. People tense up. A lady recalls his long-ago visit to her father's hospital bed. He only drew on parchment, nodded, and departed without saying a word. The day after that, her dad passed away. She hasn't communicated with the physician further. Someone else cracks a joke about being nervous. Perhaps he is the virus himself, posing as a human in a suit. There is a fake chuckle among the group. After that, everyone sits down a bit more quietly. Afterwards, you stroll home while gazing up at a starry sky. Tonight the moon is a narrow sliver of faint light, hardly able to cast shadows, and the sky is dark. You walk by the intersection where the man vanished before. You might be imagining it, but the air is noticeably chillier there. Telling yourself it's irrelevant is your strategy. It sounds like you made it. The epidemic has passed. Even so, with one hand on the doorknob, you hesitate at your entrance. You ponder the beaked mask, the silent stroll, the uniformity of mourning, and the fact that some individuals become mired in their own narrative. You enter, light a candle, and settle in for the cozy atmosphere. Tomorrow, you will assist in repairing the chapel's roof. Bread is being baked by someone else. Even if life goes on, certain shadows remain in the shadows, hidden from view behind glass eyes and sewn seams. Before, the woman on the outskirts of town couldn't be seen. Widow, herbalist, and midwife. Someone who remained in the background, never taking center stage, and who was only summoned to assist during childbirth or bleeding was this individual. Rarely did she utter a word, and when she did, it had that muted, flat quality that made you question if her mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts. However, she is currently in charge. As you walk past her garden, you'll see it for the first time. Astonishingly, it's flourishing. Herbs spilling out of woven baskets, big cabbages, tall stalks of beans. Even males are pitching in to assist her water and weed her plants. She provides guidance. Sometimes all it takes is a glance to fix them. Calm competence. No yelling. As if she is an expert in her field and the rest of us are only playing catch-up. Quite a few women can relate to that at the moment. As the weeks pass, you begin to notice it. Because men are so few, women are assuming positions that were previously off-limits to them. And that was no fluke, due to the fact that it is imperative. Think about the neighborhood tannery that a widow and her 2 daughters are now running. The youngest one seems to have been haggling her whole life. She's about 14 years old. Is it the blacksmith's shed? His sister succeeded him upon his death. At the grain shop, a former maid is keeping the records and turns out to be more gifted in mathematics than any of the men who have worked there. Meanwhile, she wields a hammer with the deftness of an artist. Curious how that operates. This is a fact from history. Labor shortages following the Black Death provided women with opportunities as well as peasants with influence. Because there were so many open positions, women began to fill roles that had previously been filled by men. Milling, brewing, money lending, even running stores or estates. Wives in some areas would often run the family company after their husbands passed away. At times indefinitely, at other times only until the boys reached the age of majority. Plus, There were a few instances where they flat out refused to return it. One of those changes is unfolding right now for you to observe. Alice, a woman living on the outskirts of town, begins hosting events she calls Women's Days. Evidently, you are not invited, but you are aware of their existence. Backyard get-togethers, where we may do nothing more than chat, read, or make tinctures and poultices to share. Wool is selling for a reasonable price to your merchant. Has Alice have a book? Someone says so. A real book from which she has been imparting knowledge. Bones, stars, and plants in a book. A combination of magic and medicine. People converse. They do, without a doubt. Someone whispers in the market about having too much freedom, excessive aspiration. Still, nobody intervenes to stop them. Just think about it. Who else is pitching in? It is also present in churches, albeit in a less formal setting. Because there are fewer priests, women take it upon themselves to lead prayers, plan funerals, and care for the ill. Not in defiance, but in reaction. No matter whose name is on the handle, when everything falls apart, everyone takes hold of the closest tool and begins hammering things back into place. It, however, is not eternal. Like a chilly breeze through a hole in the wall, the resistance is making its way back in. New priests are being educated, but in a hurried and subpar manner. Lawmakers are revising and strengthening existing statutes. A decree in a neighboring city has reached your ears. Unless they had a male guardian, women couldn't work in specific occupations. The widow's land rents cannot be accepted by another community until a man's signature is included. The pendulum begins its slow but steady return swing. Someone is always keeping an eye on women, scowling, and waiting for the customary order to return for every field they plow, business they operate, and tincture they brew. As soon as it does, they will be prepared to force women to return to the kitchen, to remain silent, and to assume the roles they played before half of humanity perished. Unimportant detail. Witch trials were more common in the decades after the Black Death in certain areas, particularly against widows, midwives, and older women who had assumed positions of public power during the devastation. The boundary between knowledgeable woman and potentially harmful menace drew dangerously near. The experts continue to argue. Some contend that the pandemic shattered social norms, granting women access to positions of authority they had never previously had. Others argue that patriarchal cement swiftly erased the shift as a passing phase. You are confused about what is proper. What you're seeing right now is obvious to you. Alice is clearly exhausted. Her once smooth hands have grown tougher. Her demeanor became tighter. People milling about her garden are noticeably less numerous now. Some of the men have come back from their disappearance. Journey, recuperation, pouting. Furthermore, they are not overjoyed to observe the transformation. They openly reprimand her for making assumptions. She continues to cut her sage without responding. It stung, and you know she heard it. After work one night, you bring a basket of early peaches and drop them off at her gate. Just put them down where she can find them. You don't say much. Still, she gives a subtle nod. As the world crumbled around them, you couldn't help but think of the women who kept everything running. The women who cared for their families, cared for the sick, and buried their husbands. After it was deemed safe, they were instructed to resume their previous level of silence. When you're forced to act as if nothing happened, you start to question what it's like to bear the burden of survival. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, you put pen to paper that night. Very brief, largely containing names. Margie the brewer and Nella the forge keeper are Elise. They have a say, and they may choose. Their intransigence in not waiting for approval is telling. Spot the note in a crevice in the wall, next to the candle that you kindle every night. A vigilant watch, dedicated not to the departed, but to those who persisted in the face of overwhelming odds. Surprisingly, the road leading to the next town remains undamaged. There are no overgrown pathways or washed-out bridges. All you can hear is the sound of gravel crunching beneath your feet as you make your way under the swaying foliage of late summer. Trading, news, or even business won't be your motivation for going there. It makes no difference to you that half of the continent has only just recovered from a natural disaster. You're still going there. It keeps going. A few days prior, you become aware of the rumors. As they pass through, a caravan of merchants brought up the latest development in the conflict between France and England. You remember. This is the same war that has been dragging on for decades. You seem to have forgotten whose team is formally in the lead. 100-year war is a losing one. Keeping score with the dead is all they do. You may make out their silhouettes when you get near the town's periphery. The armed forces, very few. Near the main road, a group of perhaps 20 people set up camp. Their armor was ill-fitting, scuffed, and dull. Some people seem to be wearing clothes that don't fit. A young man's helmet is so big that it sways as he walks. Someone else is honing a sword that appears more ornamental than functional. No, these aren't chivalrous. Here we have survivors armed. Nobody is bothered by them. At this time, no. All they do is eat, sleep, wait for orders, or act as if they do have orders. This kind is nothing new to you. Hired guns, independent aggressors, people whose lives were shattered by the epidemic and then rebuilt using blood and money. This is a fact from history. Even when the plague hit, the 100-year conflict between France and England continued unabated. No, actually. Naturally, there were periods of ceasefire and conflicts that were delayed because of epidemics. However, the war continued to drag on, with both nations going through waves of invasion, retreat, uprising, and retaliation. Military personnel who managed to escape the plague did not go back to their homes. Their battle continued. The economic void that followed the battle, according to some historians, prompted the pursuit of even more lucrative loot, which intensified the conflict. Seated from a distance, you observe the gathering. As one of them plays a broken armor fiddle, the other sings a low, tuneless lament. It appears that they are more worn out than hostile, not vicious, but lifeless, like those who have lost the ability to put an end to hostilities. Perhaps that is the plague's most enduring legacy, not merely sadness and dread, but forward motion as well. Everything that was in motion prior to the illness continues to move forward unabated, as if someone forgot to press the brake. Over by the brook, you strike up a conversation with a soldier. He claims he formerly farmed, had a family, and then they all disappeared. He was reluctant to battle, but he had little choice but to accept a spear and rations since farming fields that would go unharvested looked like a better option. You extend a slice of bread to him. It goes unappreciated by him, polite but emotionless. You can see more clearly the signs of the conflict as you go farther into town. Walls fortified, youths gone, stores closed. With somewhat quivering hands, a priest bestows blessings onto a band of newly enlisted soldiers. A banner bearing an insignia you are unfamiliar with dangles from the second-floor window of the mayor's residence. Maybe a different kind of loyalty. These things are always evolving. On the other hand, you notice something else. The graveyard is adorned with rows of crosses. Not new burials, but rather recent. Not epidemic dead, but war dead. The difference is still being maintained by someone. Unimportant detail. Some regions' burial practices included mass pits for plague victims, and, if fortunate, individual graves for war casualties. Just why? War was honorable. The epidemic was disheartening. Ignore the fact that they were identical in the end. Cold, too much hog poop, no sound. What really matters are the tales we tell ourselves, not the facts. As you take it easy, the innkeeper will chat with you. The soldiers haven't caused much difficulty, but everyone is still tense, even though he says that. More damage can be done by a single inebriated soldier, brandishing a sword, and driven by a sense of vindication than by the entire army. The world goes on, but fewer people are smiling. Little ones are playing more quietly, weddings are more intimate, even happiness seems to be holding its breath. The question of whether the plague lengthened conflicts by causing economic instability or shortened them due to the high death toll is a popular one among scholars. Whoever writes the history, the conflict, and the day all play a role, you would believe the war never ends, just changes shape. Standing here watching a boy no older than 15 try on an armor that doesn't fit. The following morning, you go from the town once more, going past the soldiers. On the shield of one of them is painted a primitive skull. Someone else is putting a red ribbon on his sleeve. You have no idea if it's based on solidarity or superstition. While you go by, they give you the side eye. One says, "Safe roads," but his voice betrays his disillusionment with the concept. With a new set of ideas in your backpack, you saunter back leisurely. Some people know how to demolish, but those who know how to repair find significance in both skills. Reflections on the ways in which violence, once let loose, can sustain itself. Ideas on the fact that plague and war aren't rivals, but rather work hand in hand. Later that day, You return to your town and have a conversation with a young man who has been considering joining the military. He claims he has no ties to the area, no job, and no compelling reason to remain. It seems sense that he should arm himself with a sword if he is doomed to die. You certainly don't attempt to dissuade him. All you have to do is bear witness. Instead of asking for approval, he wants to know where to go. Stargazing brings up memories of the troops you encountered, their battered armor, their weary eyes, and the tuneless campfire tunes they sing. In a year, you may not recognize them, and you may not even recognize them as people. Before you go to sleep, you light a candle on your windowsill. It's not for the departed or the troops. It's a simple gesture of calm, a reminder that life isn't all about pushing forward. Sometimes things can simply be. You can't help but feel the weight of your money pouch these days. Not due to the abundance of coins, but to the ridiculously large size of the coins themselves. If you jingle it only once, it will sound like you're holding a bunch of broken hinges in your pocket. That is the aspect of pre-modern banking that is hardly discussed. Money talks. It hurts your hip and makes a clanging sound when you walk. As soon as you attempt to count it discreetly, if you're even using coins, it spills out onto the floor in an embarrassing way. People are increasingly trading without metal. Swap a bolt of cloth for a bag of grain. In return for today's shoe repair, I promise you next season's lamb. Agreements are still being requested to be written out by scribes, even in bigger cities. Miniature pieces of paper that guarantee payment at a later date. Well, they're bringing it back. Borrowed money with elegant handwriting. Strange but not unwanted is the feeling. Now you may stealthily give someone a written commitment supported by your name, rather than lugging around silver pennies. It's not as spectacular, but it's far more practical. This is a fact from history. Gradually, more complex financial systems started to emerge in Europe in the decades after the Black Death, as workers were granted greater freedom and their earnings rose. Though currency in the form of trust, paper, or credit began to expand, the use of coins did not disappear entirely. Local tally systems emerged, promissory notes were carried by merchants, and banking dynasties like the Medici in Italy started to establish the foundation for capitalism. Silently, all of this came into being after the epidemic. No one may be using the term banking, yet you can still observe it occurring in your own town. A whiteboard record of repeat customers was instituted by the miller's wife. 4 loaves of bread, 2 pints of ale, and a favor involving fence repairs are all that you owe her. You're up to the task, therefore she's not concerned. Not everyone is fond of the new currency that is based on trust. Real money carries weight, according to a few of the village elders. Guarantees are not believed by them. According to them, parchment can't be melted. No way to test it for silver by biting into it. One guy is caught on camera attempting to chew on a wooden token that someone handed him to use for a goat rental in the future. Beware of spoilers. Richness isn't evident in the flavor. Coin clippers are another option. Tiny thieves using small blades scrape the edges of coins for silver, which they then melt and sell. Unsurprisingly, the government begins to take action, but this merely highlights the precarious nature of value. Does the value of this coin correspond to its weight or to an estimate? Before the cheesemonger laughs at you while you try to purchase cheese with a clipped groat, these inquiries sound philosophical. Unimportant detail. Informal banks, frequently run by monasteries or merchant families, emerged in certain towns, especially those situated near trade routes. These banks allowed travelers to deposit money once and withdraw it again using handwritten notes as evidence. It wasn't completely risk-free, but it was an improvement over aimlessly roaming around with your life savings hanging loosely from your belt. A promissory note is for a single attempt. Unfortunately, you don't have the coin on hand when you're buying wool from a passing trader. Then you only put your name, the total amount, and the deadline of 10 days to pay. Without so much as a glance, he takes it, puts it in his bag, and continues on. Feeling powerful is a great ally. Rather than in the dramatic sense of, my kingdom will quake at my feet, I mean it more subtly. Feeling like you've just been a part of something more substantial than a simple negotiating, as if you've entered a whole new game with all the regulations changed. The rules are based on timing, reputation, and literacy, rather than strength or noble origin, and it is the fundamental change that you begin to notice in all places. Power is breaking free of its ties to the past. Land, titles, bloodlines, and battles were the ancient sources of power. But now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of statistics, ledgers, who pays whom, how much, and the validity of the commitment. Once again, the demand for scribes is high, for record-keeping purposes only, not for making copies of the Bible, finances, loans, and contracts. A person's impact is suddenly greater if they can write than if they can wield a sword. The position of treasurer has greater actual power than that of mayor in some towns, and rumors have it that some communities are choosing them. Because in a world when everything is changing, the one who keeps tabs on the finances may subtly guide the ship. Of course, there's discussion. The transition to sophisticated trade and written pledges, according to others, will destroy the village's character. You can't trust that credit. The importance of working hard for what we own is being lost on us. However, the majority of these individuals were beneficiaries of the previous system, when dominance meant seizing grain storage facilities and paying rent with coins. You reflect on your own hoard, which consists of a few pieces of silver in a clay container concealed beneath the floorboards, and a folded scrap of parchment. Stuffed into your coat pocket is a note that states, "By Michaelmas, you are owed the dyed wool of 6 lambs. One is hefty and the other is dainty, which, however, is more valuable." You spend a sunny afternoon assisting a buddy with drafting a letter of credit. You have his trust, even though he can't write. Carefully, you replicate it, waiting for the ink to dry before folding the page. To him, it's just a relic. You can't help but wonder if these scribbles will be viewed as the foundation of something great and contemporary in the future. A lot of optimism, some dust, and dim lighting came from a dusty chamber. Sitting by the fire that night, you peruse a handful of the letters you've gotten. Letters of intent, funds, and contracts. They evoke an unusual sense of intimacy, as if they were echoes of convostatins, or small memorials to faith in a world that is still finding its footing. And then you get a subtle but significant epiphany. Swords, lectures, and even gold may not be necessary to construct the future. It could be constructed using ink. The first clue is the question the baker's son, who is only 15 years old, always has flour on his shirt, and seems to be humming a tuneless little song. It stops everyone in their tracks as they are chewing their morning meal. But what if the stars decide nothing at all? He asks after a brief pause and a raised head. His aunt scowls and his mom flinches. You remain silent as you eat half-burned bread and a bowl of barley stew. Everything is done for you. At that point, you become aware that something strange is transpiring. Not only are people in the village surviving and getting things done, but they are also wondering, questioning, and rearranging the shape of old ideas like mismatched jigsaw pieces. You witness it later that day at the church, where a small group of elderly men congregate beneath the stone archway, disputing not over crops, taxes, or politics, but over time. Specifically, they ask whether the calendar is relevant in a world where saints are unknown, feasts are meaningless, and harvests are either late or early, as if playing a game. Some claim it's God's will, while others argue we simply can't read the signs anymore. Even though you leave before it becomes hot, the fuse is already ignited. The proof is hiding in plain sight, so it's not all lip service. A youngster from the neighborhood is decorating the inside of the barn door with star drawings, while an elderly guy painstakingly copies lines from a worn manuscript, pausing every few words to silently mouth them. A sundial has been constructed outside the blacksmith's hut, and it is not a priest. Pausing, you gaze upon it. Even though the shade is off, the meaning is obvious. Many are eager to gain clarity. This is a fact from history. Following the Black Death, there was a change in emphasis in universities throughout Europe. Sure, theology was still very much in the spotlight, but fields like astronomy, medicine, and natural philosophy started to see a surge in interest. Formerly ensnared by rote church orthodoxy, a handful of researchers began to cast doubt on long-held beliefs. Doubt, curiosity, and finally, revolution flowed through a gap that the tragedy of the epidemic had created. Beginnings are modest. Illnesses tend to spread more quickly in the summer than in the winter, the son of a shepherd wonders. A stonemason ponders the yearly pattern of stone cracks. A trader who, contrary to what the holy writings advise, keeps tabs on which herbs are more effective at keeping pests at bay. These people are not academics. Individuals with filth beneath their fingernails and ash in their locks are these. However, they are fulfilling the original purpose of universities. The globe is on their minds. An urban legend has it that a lady in southern France, having lost her family to the plague, hid in her attic with a stack of books. 3 years later, she came out of hiding, claiming to have revised Galen's theories of the humors. This story is part true and half myth. How brilliant was she? An obnoxious person? A distraught mother using ink to make sense of her world? Her works were preserved, but perhaps not all 3. Some archival repository still has them under study. At the same time, a doctor in the neighboring town organizes a public talk in the town plaza. He explains the ebb and flow of fevers by drawing diagrams in the ground. Attendees gather to observe and hear. While others taunt, there are others who inquire. The concept of public learning is gaining traction, with the goal of disseminating not merely theoretical, but also empirically sound concepts. But I think you understand. It becomes fascinating at this point. Anxieties set in among the educated class. They are afraid of independent knowledge, not of being ignorant. Priests warn that asking too many questions might lead to heresy, and that curiosity is a hazardous thing. In your town, one man faces public shaming for speculating that celestial bodies may have a greater impact on weather than on morality. He remains silent. Do nothing more than subtly etch symbols into his roof's beams that are unmatched by any saint. You start to see that the walls of confidence are starting to crumble. In retrospect, academics still disagree on whether the Black Tibet really sparked a new inquiry culture, or if it only served to hasten its development. Some argue that after seeing mass mortality, individuals looked for answers outside of religion. Others contend that the surviving enjoyed greater autonomy, less supervision, and more space to explore, due to the high mortality rate among intellectuals. Something fresh and unusual is emerging, though, and philosophical upheaval of sorts. As if everyone is taking a deep breath before posing a profound inquiry, the act catches you off guard. 2. You can't help but stare into space for longer when the stars are out at night. Not because you're praying, but because you're simply curious. What causes the moon's form to change? Comets arrive and leave for what reasons? Is it the wind, physical contact, or some other invisible force that spreads disease? The doctors who bled your cousin till she became gray and left leeches on her chest are on your mind. No matter what, she passed away. Suddenly, questioning if they were mistaken or if they are still mistaken is not sacrilege. You keep it to yourself. At this time, no, but it does sow the seed. One afternoon, you pay a visit to a traveling scribe who asserts to have copied texts from Italy. Different ways of knowing, different models, and new hypotheses. Instead of saints' names, he uses anatomical words to mark a schematic of the human body. You seem to be confused about 50% of it. Something, though, seems to be changing. Staying alive isn't the only goal anymore. Even at this early stage, it is a renaissance. On that fateful night, you'll kindle a candle and gaze over a fragment of paper that you stumbled upon in a deserted house several weeks prior. It's just a bunch of numbers, perhaps a book of accounts. It could be a star chart, perhaps absolutely nothing. However, you continue to stare since doing so brings you a sense of intimacy with an unidentified entity. Rather than solace, not trust, understanding. Perhaps that is the thing worth pursuing in this bizarre new world. Before you see it, you hear the sound. It sounded like someone smacking a book on the floor, a low, rhythmic thump. It leads you down the alley past the baker's house, where the cobbler once tied his goat. And that's where it is, the press. Jammed into what was once someone's storage shed was a clumsy, hefty object constructed of wood and iron, etc. The aroma of ink, dust, and aspiration. On the other side, a man with his sleeves rolled up and his hands stained black is busy placing rows of little letters into a metal frame while muttering to himself. Writing is something you're familiar with. Page turns, writings from the monastic tradition. However, this is unique. I promise you. These aren't photocopies of pits found in a dark archive. Here we have multiplication. Ideas. Same as before. Fast, quick and easy, mechanical. As he notices your intense gaze, the worker retrieves a page from a drawing line above and presses it. He gives it to you with an expression more commonly seen in infants. This is a booklet. Something brief, like a prayer, a story, a skull painting, or a remark from an obscure preacher. Its contents are irrelevant to you. You can't help but be amazed by its existence. On either side of the press are stacks of hundreds of copies that are exact replicas, similarly to troops prepared for action. As a matter of fact, the first movable type printing appeared in Europe around the middle of the 15th century not long after the Black Death had passed. Although printing had been attempted by Koreans and Chinese hundreds of years before, it was the European versions, especially Gutenberg's press in the 1440s, that made knowledge repeatable. Even without a Gutenberg machine, the ripple effect is obvious in your town. Rest assured, this press is small, very basic. However, it is already altering everything. His name is Duran, and he claims a passing Italian traveler gave him the idea. He's learning on the job, and he still lacks complete literacy. He is not required to comprehend the texts, though. All he has to do is mimic them. The ideas will do the rest, he says. The disturbing aspect is that very thing, considering how ideas have moved at a snail's pace up until this point. How lovely. Contained behind the walls of monasteries, uttered by priests, and written by scribes who may devote an entire month to transcribing just one book. There was an entrance and an exit for information. However, it is now seeping out of the crevices. A shepherd might use the light of a candle to read a hymn. As a blacksmith drinks ale, he may discuss religion. Signing one's own name is something a farmer may figure out. You leave the press that day with a ton of ideas and ink smeared across your fingers. Not because of the words themselves, but rather the meaning behind them. What happens to the people who used to have control over the oven if information can be shared like bread? You can't help but notice these tiny pamphlets strewn about, on windowsills, at the market, and even on doorsteps. A few include prayers, while others offer moral tales, puzzles, and even a piece of gossip disguised as advice. According to one publication, a second epidemic is predicted by the stars. The phases of the moon, according to another, determine the harvest. While some of them may be inaccurate, accessibility is more important than correctness. The very act of holding a printed concept in your hand alters your brain's fundamental functioning. Unimportant detail. Many religious officials were against printing in its early days. It wasn't that they were afraid of books per se, but of unapproved books. Materials not reviewed or authorized. More difficult to eradicate than a whispered heresy is an awful notion that has been replicated 100 times. So printers are monitored, bans are issued, and rules are formed. The presses, meanwhile, continue to grind. While some communities embrace literacy and open their schools to the public, others struggle to hold on to their oral traditions, fearing that the influx of new information might lead to confusion. You hear tales of a northern guy who is adamant that reading aloud to his daughters will call upon demons. He means it seriously. It seems that in some places, ignorance is more well-respected than wisdom. A few days after that, you pay a visit to Duran's shed. He's at it again, this time with a page of farming advice and puzzles. He states that more people desire narratives, stories, rather than sermons or laws. You assist him in draping the pages to dry as you watch out for ink smudges. Where did you get those words from? You inquire. A shrug escapes his lips. Who cares if some of them are based on real stories and others are completely fictional? Assuming they are read, the boundary becomes less distinct at that point. No matter how ridiculous the content, the printed word lends credibility to it. This is true whether the content is factual or fictional, true or false. The world is becoming more receptive to arguments and ideas, you realize all of a sudden. It has only just started, and it is thrilling and terrible all at the same time. In retrospect, academics will argue over whether the printing press truly was the most groundbreaking innovation of the 2000s. People think it sparked revolutions in religion, science, politics, and more. Still, some argue that the press just served to fan the flames of those revolutions, and that they were always going to happen. However, as you observe from your vantage point, soiled with ink and slightly lightheaded by the implications, it is akin to witnessing the taming of fire for the second time. Candlelight reading of one of Duran's booklets was your plan on that evening. The story about a dog that tricks death into thinking he's a saint is funny, even though the language isn't perfect and the syntax isn't perfect. You read it multiple times before folding it and hiding it beneath your pillow as a secret. As you drift off to dreamland, your mind is brimming with ideas, stories, and the buzz of untapped information just waiting to be unleashed. Meanwhile, the press continues to bang away in the background. Thump, 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 a paper and wood pulse. Now time seems to have a strange feel to it. The days still go by in the usual monotony of work, food, and weather, but this time it feels like the calendar has forgotten how to act. The apples ripened ahead of schedule, and you're already halfway through harvest season. Perhaps the wheat is unfinished. You have lost all certainty, Everything happens at once, and feasts come before everyone is prepared. I feel like this year is all over the place, like a wheel with a bent spoke. Everyone seems a bit confused about the current month and even the year. The answer will be 4 out of 3 if you ask 3 people. Conflicting reports have the timestamp 1355 and 1352. Finally, someone else responds, "It's after," and shrugs it off, when the epidemic was past. Followed by death. Following the twisting and cracking of the world. It's important for that. Clerks and kings don't need dates. The hauntings would make it humorous if they weren't so real. This isn't a simple administrative affair. It's deeply personal and psychological. It hits you like a ton of bricks. You're still reeling from a hangover from a century ago. This is a fact from history. Historians frequently use the term trauma generation to describe the generation that made it through the Black Death. Rebuilding their life wasn't easy. They did it while carrying the burden of impending doom, existential fear, and perpetual uncertainty. Yields were insufficient. Whole towns fell. Wars erupted and then subsided. And still, individuals persisted. For the simple reason that pausing wasn't an option, not because things improved. You are starting to grasp this personally. What followed the plague wasn't a restoration to the status quo. Rather, it was a transition into an unfamiliar and unsettling era. An unusual tightness in your chest greets you most mornings, as if your body is still bracing for catastrophe. One sound, like a cough, sends shivers down your spine. You are sick to your stomach seeing a dead bird on the path. Although you are likely in a safe place, you still don't feel that way. Surprisingly, though, very few people bring it up in conversation. Time itself, as well as the people you know, can be a silent mourner. You've met plague survivors whose children are still haunted by tales of their ordeal. As if alluding to an unfulfilled dream that they inherited nevertheless, people say things like, "before it happened," or "when the old village was still full." You drop by the chapel early one morning and see the priest retouching a long-lost mural. The following graphic depicts a cemetery with angels bringing the bodies of the deceased up into the sky, an artifact from the epidemic era that is now adorned with delicate pastoral images, dawns of sheep and doves. He claims that people do not want reminders but serenity right now. You give a silent nod, but you can't help but wonder if letting go of memories is really just a more colorful form of denial. Surprisingly, some communities' survivors chose not to reconstruct specific structures, like pest houses and hospitals, that were destroyed during the epidemic. They thought the land had a curse on it. Entire city blocks were abandoned to decay, as other ones sprung up a few streets away, as if the pain might be redirected through other hallways. Nobody dares step foot inside a certain house in your hometown. It is simply to be avoided. It is not boarded up or chained. The wind makes the door creak open and shut, and the shutters droop crookedly. Nobody has ever gone inside that you've seen. People usually just answer, "That's where it happened," when you inquire as to why, and then they go on. Never ask again. But there's more to a hangover than just dread. Additionally, there is agitation. The youth of today, particularly those who came of age during the darkest hours, seem to be attempting to reclaim the years lost, before they were even born with an untamed radiance in their eyes. They fight more, drink more, and love more quickly. Some people decide to leave the village permanently and go to the city, where stories start circulating about new guilds, ideas, and ways of life that don't follow the old rules. One of them is approached before she leaves. With calloused hands from weaving, she is 19 years old and as sharp as a whip. She vents her frustrations by saying she's sick of wishing for rain and acting as if she can't read as well as half of the monks. A greater purpose, a sense of significance, is what she seeks. While your good wishes are genuine, you can't help but feel an odd sense of optimism, envy, or both as she walks away down the road. Thus the dilemma arises. There is a peculiar openness to the world despite its instability. Social status, labor, religion, and even time itself have all become somewhat distorted from their original forms. Nor shattered nor missing, but rather unstable. And in that sway, opportunity lies. Decline or expansion characterizes this period following the epidemic, according to scholars. A relapse into disorder and superstition, according to some. Some say it was the beginning of a new era, one of trade, science, art, or the Renaissance, whispered under their breath as if identifying it too soon might ward it off. Nevertheless, the majority feels this way. What makes it both exhausting and exciting is that the generation that followed us lived in a world without clear guidelines. That night, you find yourself engrossed in your journal, the one you had no intention of keeping, but can't seem to put down on paper. A few of the pages have visible oil or soot stains. Okay, so some of the entries don't make any sense. Being authentic is more important than being elegant. The days when you feel like you're making progress and the mornings when you can breathe easily are the ones you write about. When someone recounts a story so ridiculous that everyone in the tavern laughs till they weep. You also mention the strangeness of how much of life feels improvised, forgetting anniversaries and which saints correlate with particular feasts, and general bewilderment. Your nightly ritual begins with lighting a candle and gazing up at the ceiling. In your mind, time is like a muddy, swiftly flowing river that is about to exceed its banks. You're not sure if you're floating or flailing, or maybe it's both, but you're moving, and that's enough to keep going for a generation trying to climb out of the debris. A chicken in a cap crosses your path as you make your way to the mill. Quite literally, a chicken wearing a hat. A neighborhood hen has had a small blue cap attached to its head by an individual who is either insane, bored, or delightfully imaginative. The bird struts arrogantly through the muck, completely unaware of the little buckle that bobs with each stride. You pause, fix your gaze, and while you attempt to comprehend what you're witnessing, a young lad dashes by you, shouting, "That's Lady Clucksworth III. She now owns half the village." You blink in surprise. "Excuse me?" A man is violently and loudly disputing with a tree a short distance away over who gets to draw the lines on their land. In his hand, he is brandishing a folded parchment, vehemently claiming that the oak tree has shifted its position to the west and is now invading his cabbage plants. An adjacent woman gives a knowing nod, whispering that she had a feeling that tree had some shady history. Then it hits you. The rules are becoming increasingly strange. Weird, yet not malicious or repressive just yet. Made on the fly, excessively intricate, not enforced. These rules are what you get when half of the law enforcement officers are drunk and completely overwhelmed, and the other half are just doing their best to keep the peace. This is a fact from history. There was a lack of regulation in some European countries following the Black Death. Tragically, local officials passed away, important records went missing, inheritance lines broke down, and vast estates were either neglected, abandoned, or falsely claimed. A flurry of last-minute legal maneuvering ensued. There were so many new regulations, conflicting decrees, hurriedly redrawn borders, and litigious disputes that the real plague seemed simple in contrast. Posters affixed to trees and bar doors begin to appear. Words spoken by long-lost lords, Latin tax codes, rewritten in terrible French, and finally crossed out. Pigs are now obligated to wear bells, according to one sign. Another one says you can't dance after dark unless a priest and a chicken are there to watch you. This makes you think Lady Clucksworth is involved. Sure, there are some useful bits. Ownership issues have descended into anarchy in the wake of so many deaths. Another individual claims to have an oral promise from the goat of a widow, whose husband's cousin once tilled the land, but the widow's cousin denies the allegation. A suspicious wink and a blood-stained strip of cloth are the only evidence that a merchant has that he owns the deserted factory by the river. Renard, the local magistrate, is a weary ex-cobbler who is overwhelmed by cases. A ledger is always with him. However, you can skip reading half of the entry or address it later. He has weekly court sessions in the tavern, which is not exactly a place renowned for sober law. The man insisted on seeing the fish's legal tender status when he arrived with it wrapped in wax. With a sigh, Renard purchases him a drink and jots down a note to later study the legislation pertaining to fish-based currencies. As a curious aside, some townspeople of the time established hyper-local assemblies called customary courts to resolve disputes by oral tradition, collective memory, and strong opinions rather than codified legislation. They had democratic principles but were badly executed. The meeting is like a cross between an improv company and a town hall, occasionally genius, frequently absurd, but an improvement over nothing. Disputes over real estate are just one example. Anarchy reigns in the realm of labor regulations. Marriage regulations are unclear. Every other month, the regulations of the guild are revised. You may be familiar with the story of a woman who was legally wed twice in the span of a week due to a lack of proper paperwork the first time around. Jokingly, she says she's married twice now, All she needs to do is hope that one of them will remember to bring firewood. Strain is visible in every direction. A foundation that is still shifting beneath people's feet is being used to construct new buildings. On rare occasions, it produces the desired result. Neighbors decide to make a common map and switch around who gets to graze their livestock. When it's not, it's a catastrophe. Cabbage is hurled at a man as he attempts to open a private toll gate on a public route. However, every once in a while an intriguing event takes place. Novel concepts emerge from the muddle. A few short years ago, proposals like shared ownership, debt forgiveness, community voting, and fair compensation for everybody regardless of birth would have been thrown out of the room. People are able to explore inside the system's pliability, which is despite its messiness. The old powers are understandably unhappy. As a gentle reminder that their land is still officially owned by someone significant, lords begin to send letters with big statements sealed in wax. Most people don't even bother to read the letters that arrive months later. From time to time, a nobleman will personally appear, brandishing a sword and threatening allegiance. Typically, they depart with newly laid eggs and a look of mild perplexion on their face. Legal uncertainty following the Black Death may have irrevocably altered European government, according to scholars. Some think so. It ended feudalism, popularized the idea of personal rights, and laid the groundwork for contemporary nation-states. Some think the strangeness was only transitory, defeat that was unavoidable prior to the status quo re-establishing itself. I don't think anything is ever going to be temporary after. Witnessing a man fined for insulting a goose, you overhear a group of 10 people arguing in the alehouse over letting a communal ox sleep in the grain barn at a community council meeting one evening. There is heated debate, and then there is a vote. The ox comes out on top, but only just. After the meeting, you feel a mix of wonder, hope, and a little inebriation. That night, as you drift off to sleep, you'll reflect on all the rules you've blindly followed. Lines left behind by ancestors who have since passed away. Your life was shaped by the always, never, and must. As you observe the world's rules being created in real time, including the most absurd ones, you begin to question what it would be like to have a voice. Perhaps the laws haven't been breached, but they haven't been fully completed. These days, artworks are more subdued and ominous, but not in a spooky, enigmatic sense that gets people talking about meaning and stroking their chins. Paintings have longer shadows, hollow eyes, and even the saints appear weary. Countless skeletons are also present. Laughing, dancing, playing fiddles, kissing nuns, skeletons in crowns, skeletons on stilts, skeletons leading living people in lengthy procession to their open caskets. You simply nod in agreement as if to say, yeah, that track is all over the place, whenever you see one. The carvings can be found on the corners of coffins, in prayer books, on church walls. A peculiar little skull protrudes from behind a basket of pears on the tapestry in the merchant's house down the lane. When you pressed him for an explanation, he shrugged and remarked, "Memento mori," as if it were a mere seasoning in life's recipe. Recall, your demise is imminent, an informal prompt stitched into the fabric adjacent to the family insignia. This is a fact from history. The Black Death ushered in a horrific period for European art. A favorite theme was the dance macabre, often known as the Dance of Death, which depicted a skeleton leading individuals from all walks of life into the hereafter. From kings and priests to merchants and beggars, everyone was gone. It had an impact without being subtle. Truth, the hard, inevitable truth, began to supersede aesthetic concerns in art. New sculpture's expressions reveal it. The previous era's tranquil, stylized beauty has long since vanished. The Blessed Mother now has under-eye bags. Blood dribbles down the screen in the crucifixion scenes. It seems like everyone, including the angels, have been through a lot. There's an honesty to the visual confession that shows how dishonest it feels to have beauty without pain. Then, just when you believe art has given up, something changes. You enter a chapel one afternoon anticipating the customary somber color scheme of a funeral, only to be greeted with a golden leaf. Much of it. The wings of angels, painted with such delicacy that you fear they may sigh and flutter off the wall, cling to the robes and halos. Those expressions, they are not exhausted, they are just stunning. Neither are they haughty saints or emotionless faces. As if they've just sat down to go home, they appear genuine and kind. They've been through all you have, yet they still have faith in grace. You find a bench and settle down to gaze. Following this amount of graphic desolation, it is shocking to see such optimism. Yet this is not foolish optimism. Such optimism arises in the aftermath of tragedy, the kind that is aware of its price. Unimportant detail. After the plague hit Europe, a new style called International Gothic came into vogue, especially in Italy. It merged the somber emotional tones of earlier decades with a fresh sense of style, vibrant color, and almost comical amounts of embellishment. Imagine the most perfect symmetry, idealized features, and golden-threaded garments. Sure, let's live it up if we have to, the artists seemed to be saying. Churches weren't the only ones. Unheard of a century ago, wealthy merchants started ordering portraits, illuminated manuscripts, and private altarpieces. In time, art made its way from monasteries to people's homes. Even if it meant standing next to a skeleton, everyone yearned to see a reflection of themselves in light and pigment. Hugh, he dropped into the studio of Willard, a local painter who isn't famous but is meticulous. Everything from oil and wood shavings to the bizarre substances he puts into paint fills his workshop with an odor. Instead of perfect symmetry, he has added a detail to the panel representing Saint Michael weighing souls, a little mouse creeping along the scale chain, tipping the weight towards damnation. Art should surprise you for fun, he argues. With a nod, you certify. Strange as he is, Willard is incredibly bright. On one occasion, he depicted the Madonna with smudges on her sleeve representing the dried tears of a sobbing baby. Upon seeing that, everyone paused and uttered a word of agreement. Well, I've seen that expression before. Emotional realism is joining the realist trend in line and color. Nowadays, people aren't content with abstract concepts and faraway saints. They wish to experience the story emotionally. Woodcuts show it in scenes of daily life as well as on Judgment Day. Farming, giving birth, feasting, and sorrow. Sitting next to an empty dish and gazing into the fire is a man in one photograph, lacking any kind of description or background information. A brief but palpable pang of universal human suffering. Why did art change so much? You ask Willard. He remains completely oblivious. His reasoning is that humans evolved. We witnessed the depths below. So there you have it. The Black Death tore the curtain from the globe. It proved to everyone, peasants, artists, and clergy, that death is real and that life isn't a promise. Every frame has a person eagerly waiting at its edge. Which is why the creatives changed. Death was humanized by some. Some people made things more colorful. Whether this period saw a weakening or strengthening of faith is something that scholars will argue over in the future. Some would say it's blasphemy to depict a dead body next to the Virgin Mary in a painting. Some would argue that this is the most sincere and unadulterated form of devotion, a faith that is unafraid of suffering. That incorporates it. You, on the other hand, are simply appreciative that art may now communicate with you. You pay the chapel another visit a few days down the road. A gleam of gold remains. However, you're now cognizant of the backdrop. A brown dust covers the slopes that surround the saints, mostly overcast skies. Thorns adorn the vegetation. It seems like the power might even go out. Regardless, the angels and saints beam. You remain seated until the candle's flame diminishes. Even as you stand up to depart, you won't exactly feel lighter. Even yet, you sense that someone has noticed you. Perhaps that will suffice. In the stillness, you become aware of it first. It wasn't the calm sort, like right before sunrise or after a storm. However, the vigilant variety. Everything seems to have become silent as if to listen. A newcomer has shown up in the town. Their entrance into the baker's shop catches your eye from across the square. Just a tad overdressed. Too clean for boots, poor quality cloak. And certainly not from this area. The change is noticeable right away. Talk is boring. A little quicker, the doors close. It is time to bring the kids inside. Not all of the villagers frown. Still, they tense up physically. Be wary of smiling too much. Suspicion is practically wafting through the room. Sharp and metallic, like the feeling of having blood on your fingertips. It's with more than just this individual. Nobody knows each other now. Restless souls. Sellers and buyers, nomadic religionists. Not from this country. Everyone who lacks a familiar face from your childhood. People from other places provided news before the outbreak. On rare occasions, enthusiasm wanes. However, they now cause conflict, or far worse, inquiries. Where were they throughout the incident? Now what are they after? This is a fact from history. European xenophobia peaked following the Black Death. Strangers were held responsible. People from other countries, Jews, lepers, women, and witches were all blamed for the disease's spread. Whole towns were singled out, banished, or even killed, assailed with accusations of poisoning wells or conjuring the disease through dark magic. The Jewish inhabitants of numerous places were murdered in 1348. Neighbors banded together out of fear. Optimism gave way to suspicion. It remained ever since. Somebody is muttering something about the new traveler being a spy, and even a tax collector. Or even worse, a healer who also carries curses. Stories get lengthy very quickly. The next thing he knows, he's being subtly accused of possessing a long-ago disease, all while he's out purchasing bread. This is unbelievable to you. No, actually. However, you still slightly blush before returning the gesture as he nods his head as he drives by you on the road. Anxiety-ism works that way. While it may reduce your stature, it does not necessarily turn you harsh. It forces you to curl up within like a seed preparing for winter. Hatred is never a good thing. You would prefer not to take any chances. The tourist isn't the only one who will be targeted. A woman in your town has a birthmark that resembles a crow's foot on her cheek. Despite her long tenure here, she has noticed that folks give her sidelong glances recently. According to them, she remained healthy throughout the pandemic. It is said that her cat is able to communicate verbally. Her name is familiar to you. Her kindness is contagious. When your fire extinguished once, she brought you soup. Someone spits on the ground as she passes past the well, though, as a precaution. Strange but true. In the late 14th century, witch trials became more common throughout Europe, particularly in areas hit particularly hard by the epidemic. It was nasty and based on distorted reasoning. Someone had to have had some kind of supernatural shield if they made it through while everyone else perished. Things that were previously indicators of wisdom, herbs, midwifery, extraordinary knowledge, may now be indicators of evil. No longer does the woman with the birthmark frequent the marketplace. She settled on the forest edge, planted a garden, and now lives alone, as you will see later on. Rumor has it that she's trying to hide. Many believe it's due to her cunning plans. One day, you happen to stroll by her home for no other reason than to observe. To your surprise, you find her knelt in the soil, gently humming as she removes weeds. A wide grin spreads across her face as she lifts her eyes to meet yours. Even as you return the wave, an uneasy tug tugs at your gut. No, it's more practical to blend in and keep your head down, not because you think she's dangerous. When the firewood starts to go missing and everyone is looking for someone to blame, you don't want to be the one to defend the outcast. Once again, witches are being mentioned. When crops fail or children get sick, rumors of witches quickly spread. You might recall last year when 3 individuals asserted that a woman's glance cursed a traveling merchant's horse, leading to its death in the square. You silently stepped away while simultaneously rolling your eyes. More often than you'd care to acknowledge, that occupies your thoughts. Some academics contend that the post-plague panic was nothing more than the search for an easy target for the psychological remnants of loss, and trauma, a minority maintains that. Individuals in authority weaponized it on purpose. A strategy to shift public fury from ineffective leadership to susceptible individuals or groups. A legacy, a habit was left in any case. From faraway cities come edicts prohibiting heretical assemblies, new regulations requiring the housing of foreigners in specific areas, and levies on migrants seeking to trade or dwell. It all begins with modest, seemingly good-natured goals for the greater welfare. However, you are aware of the outcome. From a toll booth one day to a campfire the next. Lines are drawn even in your hometown. Nobody invites the herbalist to weddings anymore, and no one votes for the Moorish family on the council. A man from the neighboring hamlet, who is only a short distance away, is falsely accused of stealing before his belongings are even examined. You only need that it seems feasible. Veracity isn't necessary. Worse yet, you may even sense it within yourself. Just hesitancy, no animosity, no aggression. Only that soft murmur that suggests you should think twice before putting your faith in him. You may despise that voice, but it's impossible to silence. You battle it little by little. A nice word, a shared loaf, a letter left at the herbalist's door, a grateful expression for the soup. It's never enough, but it's better than nothing. Still, it's progress. You will stroll to the outskirts of the town that evening to survey the hills beyond. Other communities are probably doing the same thing out there. Rumors regarding more unknown individuals are circulating. You have to ask how many people are sitting around fireplaces this evening, terrified that they could be the next ones. The stars are distant and chilly. Instead of honoring a saint, you humbly speak a blessing into the night, for the sake of civility, not safety. The shutters on the merchant's house are as big as church doors, massive planks of oak adorned with mythical beasts, vines, and lions. You've probably passed it 100 times without ever entering. But you've always been curious about the inside. Today, you catch a glimpse, not because you're invited, but because the front door is ajar and a scribe is circling the front lawn, muttering something under his breath while holding a stack of papers as if they were going to explode. Your heart slows down. Hey, he saw you. Warbling about the stack, he mentions insurance. This is the latest trend. It is coveted by all. It eludes comprehension, as you stand there taken aback, as if you had just overheard a royal plot involving barn owls. He quickly returns within, financial protection. The sound of the word is off-putting, like grinding pennies. Yet once you hear it, you can't stop hearing it. To secure his next cargo of wool, the merchant is looking for assurance. A local widow hired a traveling scribe to put her daughter's financial security in the event that she dies from whatever cause, be it the epidemic, an accident, or grief. A sense of loss was ingrained in him by her. All of a sudden, there is a cost to dying, to losing, and to staying alive. This is a fact from history. Insurance in its early stages saw fast expansion in the aftermath of the Black Death, particularly in the commercial centers of Italy and the Low Countries. There was more danger than ever before in trading. Natural disasters, insurgents, and illness. Merchants began to pay premiums in order to insure their goods. They would get their money back in the event that the ship sank. There was a cost to having peace of mind if it didn't. It marked the first formalized approach to documenting risk management. I Dare You is a formalized, legally binding method of communicating with the cosmos. A man you meet in the pub introduces himself as a risk broker, a title that seems more like a pirate's call sign than a legitimate occupation. Despite his little hair, he possesses a ledger brimming with names and figures. According to him, many believe it's magical. Not at all. Bad news and math are all there is to it. You purchase a beverage for him and inquire about the catch. He claims that, as a rule, the fine print contains the catch. After that, he faints while eating stew. However, the point is made. Safety nets are insurance, in consideration of your loved ones, your home, and your future. Furthermore, it is risky. Someone else is wagering that something good will happen, while you're betting that something horrible might happen. A whole different perspective on life is contained within the space between those two wages. The marketplace is the best place to observe this. You can now get spoiling protection from a vendor who sells imported spices for an additional price. Horseshoes are warrantied for a year by a blacksmith. A midwife softly discusses a contract that promises a healthy birth, but she maintains that paperwork cannot supplant divine intervention. Time and again, it's the same mantra. Bad things will happen regardless of what you do, but at least you will get compensated for it. Unimportant detail. Insurance became the center of entire guilds in several cities. Members would be protected by a pool of funds. Like a social safety net with a ledger and a wax seal, everyone chipped in when someone died or lost their home. This wasn't a charitable contribution. It was a smart move. Of course, some people didn't buy. The elderly villagers frown upon the thought of gambling on their own demise. "I want my death to be a shock to me," says one elderly woman. Pursuing wealth at the expense of God's will is a sin with a velvet cloak, according to the local priest. Perhaps he is correct. Alternately, he could simply be frustrated that his sermons are going uninsured. Do it on your own. In a way, you and your neighbor come to an easy-to-understand arrangement. If your harvest is unsuccessful this year, he will provide you with a bag of grain. He will be given a goose if his cow dies. Underneath a jug in the pantry, you conceal it after you both sign and thumbprint it to seal it. Seems awkward, informal, but it helps you both have a better night's rest. You no longer feel as though the future is a spinning wheel pointed directly at your teeth. Naturally, enforcement is the issue. The courts continue to be overburdened. Law is a jumbled mess. You can only hope the village council is feeling generous, or that the aggrieved party has a surplus of pitchforks if an insurance contract is breached. However, it is still being done by some. Because any sense of security is preferable to none at all. This process of quantifying risk will be referred to by scholars as the inception of actuarial reasoning, uncertainty over prices. turning disorder into wealth. Proponents of capitalism, contemporary finance, and social welfare will point to it as an inspiration. When you put a piece of parchment under your mattress and draw a wheel on it, you aren't considering any of that. Every time someone coughs, you just want to put an end to the mental spinning. You overhear a mother haggling with a vendor for a small jewelry later on while you're at the market. You silently stepped away while simultaneously rolling your eyes. More often than you'd care to acknowledge, that occupies your thoughts. Some academics contend that the post-plague panic was nothing more than the search for an easy target for the psychological remnants of loss and trauma. A minority maintains that individuals in authority weaponized it on purpose, a strategy to shift public fury from ineffective leadership to susceptible individuals or groups. A legacy, a habit, was left in any case. From faraway cities come edicts prohibiting heretical assemblies, new regulations requiring the housing of foreigners in specific areas, and levies on migrants seeking to trade or dwell. It all begins with modest, seemingly good-natured goals for the greater welfare. However, you are aware of the outcome. From a toll booth one day to a campfire the next. Lines are drawn even in your hometown. Nobody invites the herbalist to weddings anymore, and no one votes for the Moorish family on the council. A man from the neighboring hamlet, who is only a short distance away, is falsely accused of stealing before his belongings are even examined. You only need that it seems feasible. Veracity isn't necessary. Worse yet, you may even sense it within yourself. Just hesitancy, no animosity, no aggression. Only that soft murmur that suggests you should think twice before putting your faith in him. You may despise that voice, but it's impossible to silence. You battle it little by little. A nice word, a shared loaf, a letter left at the herbalist's door, a grateful expression for the soup. It's never enough, but it's better than nothing. Still, it's progress. You will stroll to the outskirts of the town that evening to survey the hills beyond. Other communities are probably doing the same thing out there. Rumors regarding more unknown individuals are circulating. You have to ask how many people are sitting around fireplaces this evening, terrified that they could be the next ones. The stars are distant and chilly. Instead of honoring a saint, you humbly speak a blessing into the night, for the sake of civility, not safety. The shutters on the merchant's house are as big as church doors, massive planks of oak adorned with mythical beasts, vines, and lions. You've probably passed it 100 times without ever entering. But you've always been curious about the inside. Today, you catch a glimpse, not because you're invited, but because the front door is ajar and a scribe is circling the front lawn, muttering something under his breath while holding a stack of papers as if they were going to explode. Your heart slows down. Hey, he saw you. Warbling about the stack, he mentions insurance. This is the latest trend. It is coveted by all. It eludes comprehension, as you stand there taken aback, as if you had just overheard a royal plot involving barn owls. He quickly returns within, financial protection. The sound of the word is off-putting, like grinding pennies, yet once you hear it, you can't stop hearing it. To secure his next cargo of wool, the merchant is looking for assurance. A local widow hired a traveling scribe to put her daughter's financial security in the event that she dies from whatever cause, be it the epidemic, an accident, or grief. A sense of loss was ingrained in him by her. All of a sudden, there is a cost to dying, to losing, and to staying alive. This is a fact from history. Insurance in its early stages saw fast expansion in the aftermath of the Black Death, particularly in the commercial centers of Italy and the Low Countries. There was more danger than ever before in trading. Natural disasters, insurgents, and illness. Merchants began to pay premiums in order to insure their goods. They would get their money back in the event that the ship sank. There was a cost to having peace of mind if it didn't. It marked the first formalized approach to documenting risk management. I Dare You is a formalized, legally binding method of communicating with the cosmos. A man you meet in the pub introduces himself as a risk broker, a title that seems more like a pirate's call sign than a legitimate occupation. Despite his little hair, he possesses a ledger brimming with names and figures. According to him, many believe it's magical. Not at all. Bad news and math are all there is to it. You purchase a beverage for him and inquire about the catch. He claims that, as a rule, the fine print contains the catch. After that, he faints while eating stew. However, the point is made. Safety nets are insurance. In consideration of your loved ones, your home, and your future. Furthermore, it is risky. Someone else is wagering that something good will happen, while you're betting that something horrible might happen. A whole different perspective on life is contained within the space between those two wages. The marketplace is the best place to observe this. You can now get spoiling protection from a vendor who sells imported spices for an additional price. Horseshoes are warrantied for a year by a blacksmith. A midwife softly discusses a contract that promises a healthy birth, but she maintains that paperwork cannot supplant divine intervention. Time and again, it's the same mantra. Bad things will happen regardless of what you do, but at least you will get compensated for it. Unimportant detail. Insurance became the center of entire guilds in several cities. Members would be protected by a pool of funds. Like a social safety net with a ledger and a wax seal, everyone chipped in when someone died or lost their home. This wasn't a charitable contribution. It was a smart move. Of course, some people didn't buy. The elderly villagers frown upon the thought of gambling on their own demise. "I want my death to be a shock to me," says one elderly woman. Pursuing wealth at the expense of God's will is a sin with a velvet cloak, according to the local priest. Perhaps he is correct. Alternately, he could simply be frustrated that his sermons are going uninsured. Do it on your own. In a way, you and your neighbor come to an easy-to-understand arrangement. If your harvest is unsuccessful this year, he will provide you with a bag of grain. He will be given a goose if his cow dies. Underneath a jug in the pantry, you conceal it after you both sign and thumbprint it to seal it. Seems awkward, informal, but it helps you both have a better night's rest. You no longer feel as though the future is a spinning wheel pointed directly at your teeth. Naturally, enforcement is the issue. The courts continue to be overburdened. Law is a jumbled mess. You can only hope the village council is feeling generous, or that the aggrieved party has a surplus of pitchforks if an insurance contract is breached. However, it is still being done by some. Because any sense of security is preferable to none at all. This process of quantifying risk will be referred to by scholars as the inception of actuarial reasoning, uncertainty over prices, turning disorder into wealth. Proponents of capitalism, contemporary finance, and social welfare will point to it as an inspiration. When you put a piece of parchment under your mattress and draw a wheel on it, you aren't considering any of that. Every time someone coughs, you just want to put an end to the mental spinning. You overhear a mother haggling with a vendor for a small jewelry later on while you're at the market. She demands insurance for it. "I care more about the significance than the actual worth of the object," says her daughter was the rightful owner. "Even if it's silver, I'll want my weight returned if it goes missing," so says the merchant. For reasons of both empathy and the fact that she is obviously carrying a rolling pin. Contracts will occupy your dreams that night. Regarding letters that were wax-bound and drifted across space like paper birds, you see robed men arguing over decimal points in a chamber full of ledgers as storms rage outside. When you awake, you can't decide if the dream brought you peace or terror. You lean against the cold glass of your window, your forehead pressed against it, and speak a secret that has been nagging at you ever since you heard that unfamiliar phrase. Is it possible to legitimize hope? On your way out of town, you'll pass a wheat field that seems off. No, it's not vacant. I don't understand. The ground has been plowed. The stalk is just above knee level. However, the crop being grown there is no longer wheat. Indeed, that is grass, a field of unruly grass. You pause to observe a small group of sheep joyfully nibble along the distant boundary. Their coarse, matted wool gives the impression that they have never encountered shears, regulations, or fences. Donegans were subsisted from this land not long ago, and now it's used to feed sheep, and that hasn't shocked anybody. After continuing on foot for a short while, you will come across yet another transformed field, this one enclosed by fences and scattered with makeshift dwellings. A greater number of sheep. Additional wool. Minimal grain. Across the countryside, the pattern is repeated. Fields of grain are vanishing. The staple grains of every diet, wheat, barley, and rye, are giving way to bleeding, dirty, soft-eyed animals that provide nothing to bread, but plenty to blankets and money. This is a fact from history. A combination of low demand and abundant supply caused grain prices to plummet after the Black Death. Vola price skyrocketed at the same time. Even though there were fewer people to feed, Europe continued to rely on textiles. It also turns out that sheep are a lot simpler than humans. Wages, weddings, and sermons are unnecessary for them. With food, they develop. Shearing occurs. As you go by a woman who is repairing a wall, You can't help but wonder whose property this is. Defiantly, she shrugs. Perhaps the sibling of the baker, that or the place of worship, or none at all. So here's the deal. Nowadays, it's hard to tell who owns what. People are eager to pick up fallow land, fence it in, and blanket it with wool because they believe it spells disaster. Without fanfare or proclamation, sheep farming is booming. You recall how everyone was talking about repairing churches, granaries, and schools, but nobody brought this up. This low-key invasion of rural areas by creatures that are too cordial to cause a stir. Unimportant detail. Sheep were said to be responsible for crumbling civilizations in certain regions. Profitability, not biting, of course. Landowners might benefit from sheep husbandry even without hiring peasants because the industry needed fewer workers. Mass displacement, early enclosure, and the sheepification of England, a term used half-jokingly by certain historians, were the results of this. It wasn't a poor financial decision, but it caused a tangle in social circles. The indicators become apparent when you enter the following settlement. Smaller population, more barriers. Houses were either boarded up or converted into barns. In one cottage, the front door has been cut off and is likely being used as firewood. Inside, there is a pig curled up like he owns the place. The building is intact, but there are only 5 worshippers left, and 3 of them are fast sleeping. It's not like individuals are suddenly going missing. The change is in the cadence of life. Wheat necessitated towns. A harvest, planting, milling, and baking session. Working together, everyone had to lend a help. It was a never-ending loop. One uninterested guy with a stick is all the grass the sheep need. Though efficient, it's solitary. An elderly man, perched on a tree stump, is honing a scythe that hasn't cut wheat in 2 years as you converse with him. He reminisces of a time when the harvest celebration held more significance, and the fields behind his house were a golden hue. There are now no sounds at all, just sheep. The local wool trader paid him with a pouch of silver coins, and he shows you the coins while missing the noise, the work, and the feeling that he was part of something that fed more than just mouths. Must have for a new set of boots, some hot lager, and perhaps roof repairs. Better, he claims. It was just not the improvement I had hoped for. Now the argument is on that. Is this new system an improvement or a regression? Affluence, more trade, surplus, and fewer famines are what some claim wool to represent. Some people wonder, at what cost? As they look at the deserted towns and farmland, a nearby village whose whole people departed has been mentioned to you. It wasn't due to a plague or a conflict. Rather, the land was sold to make way for sheep grazing. The locals were either bribed or coerced into leaving. Even though no one can hear it anymore, the town's name and bell have survived. That dusk, you make your way back home, going back past the fence where the sheep are now grazing. Without any apparent reason, one of them glances up at you before slowly blinking and munching. It is indifferent to the past, the present and future, as well as to communal values and the aroma of freshly baked bread. It is there, subtly reaping the benefits of everything that was once significant being gone. The academic community will refer to this period as the beginning of agrarian capitalism, when collective farming shifted its focus from subsistence to profit. Long papers will be written about land consolidation and the commodification of animals, but it doesn't feel like economics when you stand here and watch a dozen sheep graze on what was once a family's livelihood. A gradual, drawn-out erasure comes to mind. Regardless, the advantages are undeniable. This year, you're dressed more warmly with a lined cloak and boots. Apprentices are being offered actual money by the town's wool trader. There is solace for the adaptable. Those who don't care about unemployment are like sheep. That evening, while sitting by the fire, you spin some wool on a thread. Last winter, you figured out how to do it. It's relaxing and simple. Strong and supple, the thread is strangely gratifying. You remember making bread a few weeks ago and then promptly forget about it. Although you may long for the aroma, you won't long for the feeling of flour beneath your nails. Put the thread in a basket once you've finished. As you do so, visualize the ancient fields, golden, bustling, and teeming with life. Something more subdued, lucrative, and apologetic has taken their place, and you ponder, if only for an instant, if the future seems cozy, yet somewhat too silent. Not because you're hungry, but because you know something is wrong. You wake up with an achy stomach. The sky seems ordinary. In the same predictable fashion, the wind sways the trees. There is, however, an oppressive weightiness to the atmosphere, as if everything were waiting to crush you. You were aware of it previously, but you couldn't put your finger on it. The world might end again. That odd, creeping dread. Of course, nobody actually says it. No one likes to think about the end, yet it's always there, dangling beneath the surface of every prayer, ale clink, and gaze over the shoulder at an unusually red sky. You start your day by giving the birds their breakfast, inspecting the roof tiles and exchanging chit-chat for bread. The unstated when rather than the if remains, though. Strit is a community. Words concerning signs are being whispered about town once more. The moon last night was allegedly excessively bright, according to someone. Well water, according to another source, has an unusual flavor. This is just the start of the reckoning, says a traveling friar who is preaching from atop a barrel. Nobody pays attention, and they certainly aren't laughing either. They continue to walk with that expression, half prepared and half haunted. This is a fact from history. Several more plagues, famines, earthquakes, and strange weather patterns struck Europe in the 100 years. Following the Black Death, it became widely believed that we were witnessing the apocalypse more than once. The year 1000 wasn't the only one when millennials were worried. Fear of the end of the world pervaded the medieval era. There was a pervasive feeling in the sermons, artwork, and literature that a catastrophic event was imminent. Then again, who are we to hold them responsible? All thunderstorms now seem much louder. Illness after illness raises suspicions. 4 homes light candles as one youngster coughs. Some people believe that the term plague can ward off evil spirits. Even though you're not someone who gets easily frightened, you find yourself mumbling the illness instead. This apprehension is a legacy of our culture. Thorough, marrow-level material. Everything has changed, including the music. Rhythmic songs about lovers and harvests have taken on strange new lyrics about angels with shattered wings and fire and darkness. In the tavern, singing an old song is like trying to joke at a funeral, completely inappropriate. Unimportant detail. Apocalyptic prophecy was at the center of multiple post-plague organizations. The Antichrist, according to some factions, had arrived long ago. Some people believed that the end was being put off so that people could have enough time to repent. Some others took it upon themselves to see meaning in seemingly little details, such as the way a chicken rubbed its leg against the ground. All of them were completely innocuous. For some, it's not at all. A man you meet on your travels is carrying a banner depicting a metropolis engulfed in flames, drawn by skeletal figures mounted on horses. Claiming to have had the vision while sick with a fever, he painted it himself. His words bring to mind the impending judgment, the raging inferno, and the culmination of all human transgressions. He's not acting irrationally, quiet, systematic, and horrifyingly convincing. That is him. People put their faith in him. I don't think he makes sense, but the alternative, that everything went wrong because it was completely random, is much worse. It becomes apparent to you how this dread influences your choices. Because they aren't having fun, a young couple decides to put off their wedding, because he thinks the world would end in 5 years. A trader gives all of his possessions to a monastery. Whole families are said to have fled to distant slopes, where they would try to evade destiny by herding sheep and praying. Nevertheless, life goes on in some way. A neighbor's roof gets patched by your hands. A tin spoon is traded for a string of garlic. In the middle of the plaza, you can hear the children of the town laughing hysterically as they chase after a pig. You can sense the strain, like the stillness and preparation before a storm, even though it doesn't appear like a society on the verge of collapse. You and an elderly woman who survived the plague's darkest days sat down together one night by the fire. Although she is reserved and rarely speaks up, that evening she says something that will stay with you forever. It was expected that it would conclude, she adds. Globally, that is. Unfortunately, such was not the case. That is the most challenging aspect. It just went on and on. You inquire about her meaning. She stirs the embers and says, endings are simpler than lasting through it all. In the end, there's nothing to plan, nothing to wish for, just letting go. But when you keep waking up, when the world just won't fade away, then you have to learn to carry the burden of what never came to be. You hardly sleep that night. The following morning, the sky is a clear blue and very bright. The tavern opens right on schedule, and the mill keeps spinning. Yet, that faint feeling of unease lingers in the air. You notice it in how people look up at the sky, in how they hold their cups, in how they hesitate for a moment at the door before going out. You start to think that the end of the world isn't just one moment. It's a way of seeing things, a time for the spirit, and when it comes, it stays forever. In the afternoon, you carve a new window shutter. You grow herbs. You show a child how to mold bread dough into the shape of a bird. You compose a letter that remains unsent. If the world is going to end again, you'd want to leave having accomplished something. The bells chime for a reason beyond just sorrow this time. The sound is nearly unrecognizable. It's overly cheerful, too demanding. For months, the church bell has only rung for plague anniversaries, funerals, or one surprisingly dramatic goat stampede. Today feels different, fast, lively, and a bit fun. You head towards the sound in the square, half anticipating another doomsday preacher or a cart with miracle onions for sale. What you discover is quite unusual. A celebration, not a random event, like when someone overindulges and the bakery goes up in flames, leading everyone to dance around trying to extinguish it. No. This one is set. Tables are pulled into the square. There is some bread. There's a pot of stew. A person is carefully tuning a lute, taking it very seriously, even though they aren't very skilled at it. Kids are smearing their faces with dark soot and colorful crushed berries, as a woman attaches ribbons to a goat's tail. Your eyes close briefly, not due to its surreal nature, but because it has a sense of familiarity, how things were back then. But it feels a bit different. The colors shine more vividly, yet the smiles feel more delicate. It's clear that some folks haven't been keeping up. They chuckle a bit too much, gobble their food quickly, and move as if their knees have forgotten how to have fun. It's still going on. Life is making a comeback. Here's a fun historical tidbit. After the Black Death, many areas of Europe started to gradually bring back their cultural traditions. Celebrations, gatherings, local markets, but they returned changed. Some celebrations had a mix of happiness and serious moments, combining festive joy with reminders of life's fragility. Others grew louder, more chaotic, as if people were attempting to shout above the memory of death. The celebration came back, but it always had a hint of darkness. You stroll among the crowd, observing villagers barter over this odd, worn delight. A juggler is performing, a true juggler. He throws apples into the air and catches half of them, while the crowd cheers as if he's performed a miracle with his skill. A woman with a lute sings a song about spring that feels fresh and new. Fresh lyrics focusing on survival, on bones resting in the earth, on how moss gently covers gravestones. It's lovely, yet somewhat unsettling. You spot familiar faces you haven't encountered in a while. Some appear slimmer, while others seem weary. A boy has a new streak of white in his hair that he didn't have before. Just ask about it. He shrugs and says, I saw some things. That makes it clear. It really seems that way. A peculiar figure wearing a colorful mask strolls through the square, ringing a bell and sharing riddles. Whenever someone makes a mistake, he tosses a handful of flower petals at them and exclaims, You're forgiven! The rules are vague, the riddles are tricky, yet it all comes together somehow. People are laughing, genuine laughter, hunched over, cheeks wet with tears. Laughter that takes your breath away. A sensation of release spreads through your chest. And then, just as it begins to feel familiar, someone starts to cry. You might not even realize why. Perhaps they noticed something in a song. Perhaps the stew brought back memories of a brother or sister. Perhaps it all happened too quickly. They sit on the grass, hugging their knees and crying softly. They are not reprimanded by anyone. A small group of people sits close by, silently. Just to be present, not to change anything. It feels oddly reassuring. Joy and grief have found a way to share the same table, nudging each other for room. Interesting tidbit. After the plague, festivals often featured a quiet moment to remember those who had passed, typically at sunset. The bells would quiet, the music would halt, and everyone would gaze at the horizon to reflect. After a brief pause, the noise would come back even louder, untamed, not to wipe away the sorrow, but to respect it by moving beyond it. As the sun sets behind the hills, a large bonfire is lit. It starts with a few coughs, then bursts into a powerful sound. Bright sparks rise into the darkening sky. Kids twirl and move around it, Adults act like they're not dancing, but they really are. An elderly man shuffles into the glow of the fire, holding a jug he refers to as plague juice. It turns out to be a mix of wine, vinegar, and whatever remnants he could find in his cupboard. It may not be great, but it works really well. A smile crosses your face. The masked riddle man strolls by and remarks, "You didn't expect to see this again, did you?" "What do you want to know?" Waves to the audience, a time yet to come. You want to share a witty thought, but you're feeling overwhelmed, so you simply nod instead. As the music quiets and the air turns crisp, you find a spot at the edge of the square, holding a piece of bread and a cup of what could be wine. Across the fire, you spot the woman with the birthmark, the one everyone talked about. She's sitting with a child, demonstrating how to weave grass into a small bracelet. For once, everyone is facing her. No one is glancing at her from the side. They're simply allowing her to be. You remain until the final song ends, until the last glow disappears. People wander home, chuckling, clasping hands, humming bits of tunes from faded memories. There's a single moment when everything feels just right. Not healed, not complete, but all right. You stroll down the calm streets, passing closed houses and dozing goats. The air has a scent of burnt wood, beer, and blooming flowers. Tonight you feel alive, free from the shadows of fear, hunger, and uncertainty. For now you are just like everyone else. And perhaps that's the most extraordinary thing anyone can be in a world that has worked so hard to change you. A whisper begins, just like it often does. A friend of a merchant has a cousin who says that a man in Florence is painting actual people, not saints. Not kings, not gods, just everyday people, with lines on their faces, eyes squinting, hands soiled from labor. And in some way, they are important. The story travels quickly, catching on easily and spreading everywhere. Initially, you brush it off. Artists create the pieces that they are commissioned to create. Then, you come across a different tale. A young sculptor in the city has created a statue of a bear man. Neither a saint nor a ghost, just an ordinary man. High, steady, flawless, like the way lightning strikes just right. Pointy, risky, and completely unusual in the calm remains of life after the plague. Then a small booklet is handed to you. Bound by hand, it has the scent of oil and candle smoke. Inside, in unsteady ink, are drawings of machines. Wheels, levers, pathways, feathers, wings like a dream of flying for everyone. The sketches are strange and delightful. You turn the pages, feeling a peculiar heaviness in your heart, as if you're witnessing someone dream in a very vivid way. That's the moment you sense it, the change. It's more than just getting by now. It's not really getting better. It's coming to life. Here's a fact from history. Some historians believe that the Renaissance, meaning rebirth, was sped up by the impact of the Black Death. As old systems fell apart and wealth was shared, fresh chances for learning, creativity, and personal expression appeared. In cities such as Florence, Siena, and Venice, art and science were not merely kept safe. They burst apart. People looked inside themselves, then reached out to the world. And when they looked again at the world, they saw more than just God. They looked at their reflections. It feels a bit strange at the beginning. For many years, art and learning had a single goal, to celebrate heaven. Now it's celebrating hands, eyes, muscles, and people. The floors are getting a fresh coat of paint. Spots on the skin, marks left behind, short fingers, clearly visible. Honored. You look at a drawing of a peasant woman's feet. Soiled, broken, stunningly depicted. And you can't quite put into words why it touches you so profoundly. New names begin to echo around you on the street. Secrets from the past. Giotto, Petrarch, Boccaccio. You haven't read their work, but people pronounce their names in a unique way. Respectful, yet not sacred, like guardians of thought. One morning, the village blacksmith, who has only ever said 3 words to you outside of, "It's done," shows you a page from a borrowed manuscript. It's a piece of poetry. It's about losing something and finding a way to keep going. A flower blossoms where a body once rested. He remains silent, simply hands it over to you as if it were a present, and then strolls off. The page stays tucked in your sleeve for days. A little-known detail, Giovanni Boccaccio, known for his work Decameron, created this important piece of Renaissance literature during and after the years of the plague. A group of 10 young people leaves Florence to escape the sickness, sharing 100 stories along the way. The tales are filled with sadness, humor, love, and the unexpected. What connects them is their shared humanity. They aren't sermons. They are everything. Natural, wild, and honest. You take a copy on loan. Rough, manually written. Half the page is blurred and you read it quietly, as if you've discovered a way to escape the shadows. The stories don't ignore death. They do not. Yet they find it amusing. They experience it. They don't focus on heroes or extraordinary events. They focus on individuals just like you, weary, uncertain, yet still vibrant. And gradually, you come across something new. The kids in your village are curious and asking more thoughtful questions. What did we lose? So what can we create? A young boy shapes designs into wood, curious about how the grain will break apart. A girl captures bees in a jar, not to harm them, but to observe the movement of their wings. A man you recognize, partially blind from illness, begins to paint using crushed berries on pieces of linen. His work isn't great, but it's his own. The world is returning, but in a new way. Bold, unusual, clever. A merchant and a priest are having a disagreement that you can hear. It's a thought about the soul, questioning if God asks for suffering, or if he simply desires us to create. They may not come to a conclusion, but the sight of them arguing in public without anyone getting hurt is something different. The architecture shifts too. Weathered stone chapels are adorned with vibrant stained glass. Arches expand outward. Buildings stretch up to the sky as if they've just recalled their freedom to do so. You go to a nearby town and find a public square filled with colorful painted tiles. Just ordinary people. Nothing more, nothing less. Moving, smiling being. This will be known as a cultural revolution. They'll say it changed the West, that the horrors of the Black Death opened the world and let in science, beauty, doubt, and possibility. They will organize it clearly in books and timelines. But from your viewpoint, in a village still coming together, it seems more chaotic. More like a garden blossoming in unexpected places than a revolution. You glance around and notice that the questions people are asking have shifted. What is God's will? But what do I want? Not how do we get by, but how can we give it significance? And there it is. The plague is a thing of the past, yet its marks can still be seen all around. Not in decay, but in renewal. On the barn walls, there are drawings pinned up. In the incomplete songs, a broken wagon becomes a stage for a play that no one gets, yet everyone claps along. Death attempted to erase everything, but rather than disappearing, the people grabbed chalk and began to create once more. You sit up late that night, leaning over a piece of paper. You don't create art. You aren't a writer. You hardly know how to grip the pen. Still, you create a drawing. A cozy home, a friendly goat, a young kid, a bright sun. It's really bad. You smile at it regardless. This is included as well. More than just getting by. More than just recalling. Yet making things, even when no one requests it. Particularly at that time. As you relax in the courtyard, feeling the warmth of the sun on your face, a comet suddenly streaks across the sky. It glides through the sky just after sunset, shining brightly enough to make the villagers gasp in surprise. Kids shout with joy. Elders narrow their eyes. A man spills his ale and quickly crosses himself, nearly hurting his shoulder in the process. You look at it, for a while, shining, incredibly quick. For a brief moment, it feels as if the sky is giving you a playful wink, or giving you a heads up, or either one. By now, you'd expect people to be familiar with unusual events. Once it's all done, a deadly disease. The tremors, the hunger, the whispers, the flagellants, the bread riots. You might imagine that a line of fire in the sky wouldn't disturb anyone. Yet it does. Even in today's world, many believe that the skies above are keeping an eye on us. When the skies shift, it seems like someone on the ground has made a mistake. Here's a fun fact from history. During the 14th and 15th centuries, people commonly saw comets as signs of things to come. Signs of disease, conflict, loss, or heavenly retribution. Halley's Comet, the most well-known of its time, showed up in 1456 and frightened Europeans so much that Pope Calixtus III supposedly called for prayers and even an exorcism to ward it off. When you're unsure, just shout at the sky. However, some people remain calm. A young man beside you squints at the comet and begins drawing it in the dirt with a stick. He describes it as beautiful. I'm curious about what it's made from. His mother pulls him inside by the ear, making a hissing sound. That's how the plague begins, she whispers. The question remains, what is it composed of? People seem to be asking questions like that more frequently now. It's not only about the meaning, but also about the way it functions. They are little questions. Questions that spark curiosity. What creates fire? Why do some herbs help with fevers while others make you think your goat is scheming against you? Why does rain come down heavily after thunder? Where does the sun disappear to at night? They seem harmless, but they're not. There are lines in the wall. You come across a woman named Alessa who has gathered a collection of bones. For learning, not for tradition or belief. She is curious about how joints function. Why do some heal in a crooked way? In her cottage, there's a shelf filled with neatly cleaned skulls, vertebrae, and ribs, arranged like a collection of books. She talks softly, yet her thoughts are clear and quick. The body is not a puzzle, she explains. We simply haven't examined it thoroughly. Interesting tidbit. Sure. After the plague, a number of thinkers started to question the traditional medical beliefs of the medieval period, particularly the idea of the four humors, autopsies. Once considered off-limits, began to be conducted more often, particularly in cities such as Padua and Bologna. Surgeons and physicians, eager to understand why some people died while others survived, gradually moved away from Galen's old teachings and started to ask bold questions like, what if that's not true? You go to a wandering apothecary who allows you to hold a magnifying glass. It's rough, unsteady, just a bit more than a glass marble. When you look through it at a leaf, you notice details you've never seen before. Veins, delicate hairs, designs like a hidden code. You return it, feeling a bit dazed. The apothecary smiles and says, the world is not smaller than we imagined. It's larger. This is the start of something new. People continue to pray, light candles, attach charms to doors, and quietly speak to saints. Now they are putting things on paper, measuring and observing insects, sketching them, boiling roots, and comparing the results. Not to take the place of faith, but to be alongside it, gently touching its fingers and murmuring, and what more? It starts off quietly, just a handful of notebooks and some ideas, but you can sense it growing. It's there in the air. Just as the art transformed, just as the music became gentler. The questions are changing now as well. The future scholars will describe this as the beginning of empiricism, a deep breath before the dawn of new ideas. They will mention Copernicus, Vesalius, and Da Vinci. They will create timelines and outline connections. But to you, it's more peaceful than anything else. A child is simply wondering why frogs croak more during springtime. A midwife is curious about why some herbs help with childbirth more effectively than prayer. It's simply a person in a dusty room, lighting a candle and turning to a page, and considering that perhaps we still have more to learn. And the great thing is, no one needs to seek approval anymore. For a long time, knowledge belonged to priests, guilds, and kings. But after the plague, the gaps in that system remained open. As books became more affordable and individuals began to think independently, the barrier couldn't withstand it any longer. Curiosity spreads easily, and now it's in the sky. One evening, you find yourself sitting with a neighbor's son, a boy who used to have trouble spelling his name, but now spends his afternoons sketching the different phases of the moon. He gestures towards the sky and says, I believe it's simply a rock, a large one. I'm not sure at this point. You simply listen, without laughter. The truth is, the world still has more breaking to do. But it isn't finished being rebuilt yet, and you've begun to notice something. This rebuilding is not about returning to the past. It's about improving things, more liberated, more accurate. That night, you find a spot under the stars and search for the comet once more. It's disappeared, hidden beyond the horizon, yet its presence lingers in your mind. The mark it left isn't written in the stars. It's in the questions that people began to ask because of it. You lack the answers, not at this time, perhaps never. For the first time in a while, you feel it's worth taking a look.